Right, good evening, everybody. Okay, right, sorry about that. Right, so please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Scrutiny Committee on the 19th of August 2026 from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Malcolm Wallace. I am the chairperson of this committee. The open parts of this meeting are being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available for later viewing. Please ensure that mobile phones are on silent or switched off. In the event of an emergency or the need to evacuate, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all instructions from the team. As you may have seen, there are exempt items on the agenda. If the committee wish to discuss these exempt items, we will need to move into private session. If any members of the public are here at those points, I will have to ask them to leave the room. However, they will be welcome to wait in the St. Cross room nearby and rejoin the meeting once the private session has ended. Welcome to everyone attending today. So turning to the agenda, item 1 is apologies and deputy members. I believe we have apologies from Councillor Pett, who's been replaced by Councillor Atwell. Matthew, any others?
No further apologies, Chair. Thank you.
Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest to declare regarding items on the agenda? Councillor Clear.
Thank you, Chair. I'd better say I need to declare that I do have a disclosable pecuniary interest due to my additional role as a Hampshire County Councillor. However, as there is no material conflict of interest, I have a dispensation granted by the Audit and Governance Committee that enables me to speak and vote on these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and likewise myself.
Right, thank you. On chairperson's announcements, just a quick one to say, as you'll have noticed from the agenda, the River Park Leisure Centre disposal has been postponed to the September meeting. So there are just the two main items on the agenda tonight, which are the St. Peter's car park and the Central Winchester regeneration. Right, item 4, minutes of the meeting on the 26th of May. Can these be agreed and signed as a correct record?
Agreed.
Super, thank you. Right, item 5, we move on to public participation. Now we've agreed to kind of do the public participation in two bits tonight. So we'll have public participation on item 6, which is the St. Peter's car park first, and then we'll go through that item, and then we'll have another session on public participation just before item 7, which is the Central Winchester regeneration. So on this first one, we have 4 speakers registered to speak. So can I ask Ian Tate if you would like to come up first, please?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the Scrutiny Committee. Whilst I wholeheartedly support the proposals, I don't understand why the paper suggests that there will be some limited parking provision. I was assuming that there would be no provision for car parking. This is a highly sustainable site, and I feel it is essential that we ensure that new residents are people who won't use cars. Residents will be excluded from the permit zones anyway. People who live in the city centre have to learn to live without cars. We're increasingly seeing that in London, that people do find alternatives, and I think this city should be a leader for all sorts of reasons. That said, I already sense that there is a degree of local opposition, so I think it is absolutely essential that members, and that scrutiny as well, make sure that there is a commitment from ward councillors and the wider community to support these proposals. Members will be aware that the council had to write off over £130,000 because of the failed Dyson Drive affordable housing scheme, which was recommended for approval, but members argued against it, and the local ward member also spoke against it. For reasons I don't understand, and I wonder whether scrutiny should get involved, it was decided that the council would not appeal a refusal for its own scheme, even though it was recommended for approval. For this scheme, the recommendation is to spend £480,000 to get planning permission for 44 dwellings. At £11,000 a unit, that is a significant cost and generally higher than most developers would expect. Although obviously I haven't seen the confidential papers, I do hope that members thoroughly interrogate the figures to ensure that scheme finances stack up. The council has previously aborted schemes in Tower Street and Parchment Street. Even though you secured planning permission, it then became apparent, was apparent to me before then, that the schemes were not viable, and both those sites have now been sold with no benefit from any planning uplift. Now, I've been to this committee before and other committees about trying to see whether the council is learning its lessons, and I truly hope that the council has learnt the lessons from the Southbrook Cottages disaster, the financial disaster for those 6 units. And regrettably, I don't think it's learning the lessons for Woodman's Close in Sparsholt, which is a prohibitively expensive scheme. And I do wonder whether the fundamental approach to this scheme, the council managing it, is right, and whether it should go down the bar end route and look at an alternative way of delivering this much needed affordable housing, which I fully support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think our next speaker is Lynn Mellish.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening. Firstly, I just would say I'm no longer a member of the TAP board, because that's what a lot of people know me as, but I'm no longer a member. I'm speaking as a member of the public and as an interested tenant. I obviously haven't been paying enough attention, because I only became aware of this scheme and I read it in the Hampshire Chronicle a couple of weeks ago. If the plan was to build council housing with social rents, I might quite like it. So my first critique is affordable housing opposed to council housing. We all know that in Winchester, rents for affordable housing are set at around 80% of market rent. And in Winchester, private rents are well above the national average. Affordable housing is unaffordable for many people in low-paid jobs. We didn't have affordable rents before 2011. A social rent was just a council house rent. According to this report, when the council purchased the old St Peter's School in the 1970s and demolished it, the intention was to build council homes. It didn't happen because it was needed as a temporary car park, but now that it is back to being considered for housing, it seems to me that it should be council housing with social rents, as was the original intention when it was purchased in the 1970s. If the proposal to build 40 flats and 4 houses goes ahead as affordable housing, with high rent, no parking, and the expectation that people will utilise public transport, then it is possible that the homes will be difficult to let. Public transport in Winchester is not frequent or reliable enough for this to be a viable option. Secondly, paragraph 1.3 of the report. I don't believe it is true that limited parking will reduce cars travelling the North Walls route. 40 flats and 4 houses, every one of which will have guests visiting, deliveries, contractors, cleaners, etc. Plus all those vehicles displaced from the lost car park aren't going to disappear. They will be driving around looking to park. So I would suggest that actually traffic will inevitably increase because of this development. Also, the expectation that people who live in these homes will not require cars, this thinking is premature. Maybe in the future, and great for the future, but for now, this is Winchester, not London or Oxford. Our public transport service is unreliable, cuts, delays and cancellations to services. City centre residents already have problems. Even those without cars complain that tradespeople, carers, guests don't turn up or are delayed because of parking issues and permit spaces being taken by those that shouldn't be there. Building on this car park without parking will just exacerbate an already difficult situation. Although, as stated, I would prefer to see social rather than affordable homes being built. That is my view for anywhere in the district, not just here. My real hope is that this scheme won't happen. Yes, I want to see more council house building, but not on a well-used, much-needed city car park. We have lost several car parks in recent years. And maybe we won't need car parks. Maybe Winchester will become free, but that time isn't here yet. And therefore, I feel this car park needs to stay. Thank you.
Thank you. We've also got two councillors who'd like to speak on this item. So, Councillor Godfrey, please.
Thank you and good evening. I have a few words on this subject about the risks in this mentioned in this paper, or the absence. I would want you to look at three particular subjects. At this stage of a project, there is a significant risk of cost overruns. When you're starting with a budget of £500,000 just to design 43 buildings, then you are taking a big punt in getting it wrong. And I think with the risk of the overall cost making these houses unaffordable for either for the council or the future tenants is very real and needs to be properly examined. The next is a matter of was raised by a previous speaker. The car park is currently very well used, and the throwaway comments in the paper that cars will go elsewhere in the city is ill-advised, I believe, because there are many cars that will have to be relocated. Why are they parking in St. Peter's as opposed to in the Tower or Chesil Street now? They are there because they want to be closer to the River Park or to the university or to other areas on that side of town. Where are they going to park? And is there space? Or is it going to discourage them from coming into town at all? Do we want to close off that part of Winchester? And I also ask the Scrutiny Committee to look into that this particular issue. And my third area is, as I mark over 40 years since I first moved to Winchester, I recall very closely the building of the new Catholic primary school up in Oliver's Battery, because it could no longer survive in the centre on this car park site. And the land was taken away by a previous council. I think it went through the county council first and then on to the city council. And they couldn't build a new school on that site, primarily because it was at risk of flooding. And that's not mentioned as a specific issue. We've all, those of us who lived here more than a couple of years, have seen that area flooded. And yet that is not one of the big issues. Here we are putting affordable housing in a high risk flooding zone next to a river. Is this wise? Is this not going to add to the costs? Or are we just going to plough on because we're cleverer than that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Scrutiny Committee. I support the principle of using this brownfield site to provide much needed affordable housing. As has already been said, social housing, of course, would be better. My questions are largely about making sure the financial and delivery assumptions are sufficiently robust before we commit to expenditure. Turning to the loss of parking, which has already been mentioned, St. Peter's provides 165 city centre spaces and generates approximately 395k gross income last year. The report assumes there is sufficient capacity elsewhere and that much of that revenue will therefore be retained as motorists move to other council car parks. Can I ask, what quantified evidence supports that assumption? In particular, has it been assessed that displacement of parking at peak periods, replacement provision for public disabled parking, the net rather than gross loss of general fund income, and the cumulative impact of the central Winchester regeneration, the Winchester movement strategy, and other changes to the city centre car parking? Before Cabinet proceeds, I think we need to understand the financial consequences if motorists do not simply transfer to another car park. My next point is about the £8 million S106 subsidy. The report says the scheme may require £8 million of council subsidy from affordable housing SO106 committed sums, even assuming government grant support. I hope my interpretation is correct. So my question is, what is the current uncommitted balance of S106 affordable housing commuted sums that will actually be available and legally eligible for the scheme? What additional receipts are sufficiently certain? Over what period? And what is the funding gap if these receipts or government grants do not materialise? This seems particularly important given the Council's own internal audit findings about weaknesses in the recording and reporting of the S106 contributions. My third point, it is quite clear that 480k could become abortive expenditure if planning permission is refused or the scheme ultimately proves unviable. Will the 480k be released in stages with clear stop-go gateways as pre-application advice, surveys, viability work, and funding certainty develops, rather than committing to the whole sum before the principal risks are understood? If that's not already intended, could Scrutiny recommend such a stage approach to Cabinet? My next point is about the JCT design and build contract at para 3.8. The contract represents the least financial risk and exposure to the council, as it says, while acknowledging that transferring risk to the contractor increases tender costs. So can I ask, what comparative assessment has been undertaken to demonstrate that the additional risk premium under the design and build represents better value for money than alternative procurement routes or retaining those risks which the council is better placed to manage? And can the officers identify what or which major risks would actually be transferred and which would remain with the council? And my final point is, given that we are being asked to spend up to 480k, but the final business case will not return until after tendering and may fall to the shadow or successor authority in 27-28, does that not create a significant risk of abortive expenditure if the scheme is subsequently not taken forward? I appreciate we cannot control the LGR timetable, but we can surely accelerate the project programme where possible, or with additional decision points that could be introduced to reduce the risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, and can I say thank you to all the speakers? I thought all your points were made very well, so thank you. Right, I believe now that Councillor Reach will introduce this item, supported by Simon Hendy and Caroline Egan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, public speakers,
Yes, I'd like to introduce this item. This paper will be seeking is capital expenditure of £480,000 to allow for professional fees to develop this scheme. The scheme itself is a key part of this council's commitment to affordable houses, to affordable homes. We've said that by 2031 we will have 1,000 such homes. So far, it sets out in the paper, we've already built or acquired since 2020 364, with another 124 under construction. Alongside this scheme, we have a recently announced scheme at Bar End for around 80 homes. So taken together, this will represent over 120 new homes very close to the city centre. As one of the public speakers mentioned, this site was always earmarked for council housing. The construction of the Brooks took place in 1987, which is an absolutely fantastic year, if you ask me. And that was from the time the site was used as a temporary car park. Remarkably, it took until 2020 to include it in the local plan for housing, which we've now done. The local plan, which was consulted on extensively with residents right across the district, included this site for housing. It was envisaged that there would be approximately 30 units on the site in the local plan. The paper before you says we've managed to come up with a good scheme, which will deliver around 44 homes on the site. The homes will be a mixture, if this is approved, of 1 and 2 bed flats, and also of 4 townhouses with 2 bedrooms. I'm looking at offices, 3 bedrooms. I looked at offices over there for the townhouses. It is a highly sustainable site. There are some issues with the site. Part of the reason we need to do this work is to understand things like the groundwater conditions on the site, noting that it is in the centre of Winchester, which, as we know, is a very wet site. It's close to the river, so we need to fully understand the water. We believe that the groundwater flows away from the site, so we think that that risk is minimal, but that work will all be done as part of the pre-planning planning work that we have done here. Turning to the parking, which I know is an emotive issue, but we've said repeatedly that we think that reduction of parking in the city centre is a good thing. That's not to say we're going to ban cars, we're not going to do anything of that sort. We're going to make sure there is sufficient parking in the city centre for people who want to park. We've also said, the council has also said, that we will retain the sites to the north of the city centre on Worthy Lane at the cattle market for parking until a northern park and ride is built. What we're talking about here is the removal of around 150 car parking spaces. We've already delivered around 200 parking spaces at Kings Barton for part of the northern park and ride, and then subject to planning and development at Sir John Moore Barracks, up to another 650 car parking spaces there for a northern park and ride. Now, I recognise that if you live in the city centre, you have facilities and you have shops and you have everything on your doorstep. I dispute the fact you need to have a car in the city centre. I never use my car in the city centre, and I live actually much further away than this site is, because we have everything on our doorstep. It's not necessary. The limited parking that will be provided on the site will be for people who are disabled. It's a small number of spaces for disabled residents. For people who really, really desperately want to drive into that part of the city centre and park, there is River Park car park, which is only slightly further away. It's probably 100 yards further down the road past the school. So there will retain parking in this area. The critical thing of removing car parking from this site is that we remove people's needs to drive around the one-way system, not just from the north of the city, but from elsewhere as well. But we do recognise that, of course, if you live further out from the city, there may not be a regular bus service, and it may be difficult to find somewhere to park. Hence my comments about making sure there is sufficient parking. Up to 850 spaces will be provided additionally to the north of the city for the park and ride, as well as retaining those spaces on Worthy Lane. So I'm convinced that the parking problems have been overcome and that the site will be sustainable, and it will be a wonderful place for people to live, and it's a fantastic contribution to our affordable homes. Turning to the tenure type of this as well, I know this is an issue. This is not a full business case yet, so there is work that needs to be done. I've already talked about the flood risk assessment we need to do and various other bits before this goes to planning, but the tenure type as well will be looked at. We hope, and I think I'm okay to say, please do shout from others not, that there is a social housing opportunity here to do this, deliver this as social housing. So for members' awareness, they are rents much lower or lower than affordable rents, which themselves are my teeth back in, are lower than market rents as well. So I can't make the commitment at this stage. It depends on planning and it depends on the full business case. But we think there is a way we can deliver this site with a significant number of social housing and perhaps also with a few shared ownership tenures on that side as well. Officers are nodding, which is a good sign. So hopefully that will give you some comfort. And also referring to a few of the other points as well around how accessible this site is. It is in the city centre. It's walkable to the railway station, all the facilities in the city centre. But for people who want to use the bus, there are 21 bus routes which serve the bus stop right next to this site as well. So there's a bus every 2 minutes through most of the day. It's a highly sustainable site. It'll be a great contribution to our affordable housing stock. And I see no reason why we wouldn't wish to pursue this. Hopefully that gives a good introduction.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Reach. Yeah, before we get into the committee questions, I thought it'd be helpful to clarify what is and what it's not, what we're not doing tonight at this committee. The first point is that the principle of residential development on this site has already been established through the adopted local plan. The site has been allocated for housing use, and that wider policy decision was taken by council through the local plan process, which concluded earlier this year. The committee is therefore not being asked this evening to determine whether the site should remain a car park, whether it should be allocated for housing, or to reach a view on any future planning application. Nor are we being asked to approve the construction of a housing scheme. The decision before Cabinet is, and that we are scrutinising, is whether to proceed with the next stage of work, which includes surveys, investigations, design development, and the preparation of a planning application, funded through up to £480,000 of development expenditure. A final decision on whether the scheme should proceed to construction will be considered through a separate final business case at a later date. The role of scrutiny this evening is therefore to consider whether the proposed next steps are sound, proportionate, and supported by sufficient evidence, and whether Cabinet has identified and understood the principal risks before proceeding. In that context, members may want to consider three broad areas. Firstly, the overall financial position of the scheme. Members may wish to understand what is currently known about costs, funding sources, subsidy requirements, and long-term affordability, and what additional information will be available when the final business case is brought forward. Secondly, the wider impact of the parking charges on council finances. The site currently operates as a city centre car park, and members may wish to explore the implications of the displaced parking demand on future income streams. Thirdly, the key delivery risks associated with the site itself. These include matters such as the flood risk, which has been talked about, but also archaeology. That's always an issue, well, it's often an issue with Winchester developments. Ground conditions, contamination, and other constraints that could affect viability, cost, or timescales. Finally, members may wish to bear in mind that the final business case is likely to be considered within the context of local government reorganisation. One useful test for us this evening is whether the work proposed now will provide whichever authority ultimately takes the decision with the information to make a fully informed judgment. Okay, so with that, I'm going to take my opportunity as chair to get my question in first. So, and then we'll move on. So, the report identifies £480,000 of at-risk expenditure and refers to a possible future subsidy requirement of around £8 million. However, members have not been provided with an overall financial model for the scheme. Can officers explain what work has been undertaken to assess overall viability and risk, and how members can be satisfied that the £480,000 expenditure is proportionate when we don't have visibility of the wider business case? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So officers have prepared a financial viability appraisal to assess the scheme, but because it's such early days, it didn't feel appropriate to share it within the report at the moment. But that's the appraisal that has shown that approximately £8 million subsidy would be required to make it, under our current assumptions, viable.
So we've got a business case. We're just not going to share it to members, and you're asking us to trust the officers that it's all okay. £480,000 is a lot of money to trust to officers just on there saying, trust us.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps if I could come in. I don't think we're really saying that to you. We have an outline financial appraisal, but there are some high level assumptions in there. As Caroline has said, there's an assumption about the level of council subsidy that would be funded from community sums available. To answer Councillor Lee's earlier question, there's between £11 million worth of community sums available at the moment, and we're anticipating that to increase to around 17 million. So it's well within what's expected to be used for this scheme, is well within the available funding. There is also assumption around the grants that could be secured from Homes England towards this, and we've modelled that on the basis of what grants should be attainable for the scheme. But clearly, if that doesn't come forward, that would be a risk for the scheme. There's been assumptions on the market value of the site. Now, the issue around that is, of course, the market value for the site, because this is currently a car park owned in the general fund. It would have to be appropriated from the general fund into the housing revenue account. Well, the actual value of the site can't be determined until there's a planning consent that determines what goes on that site. So although there is an appraisal that shows there's a viable scheme here, it's quite high level, but it does show there's a viable scheme. And therefore, at this point in time, it was thought it wasn't appropriate to bring it forward to members because there are too many unknown, well, not unknowns, but too many of those variables that might change in the future. And that's why the £480,000 is required to enable those risks to be managed and designed out.
So will the 480,000 be released through defined project gateways? As key risks are investigated and retired as we move forward, and will members have opportunity to review progress before the full amount is committed?
Yes, in the short answer, and I appreciated Councillor Lee raising it as well. We have a bi-monthly new homes board, which is attended by both officers and members, and I would take the stages of that project to that new homes board and seek sign off as we go through the project. So there'd be every 2 months member oversight of what's happening on the project.
So
Chair, thank you, and thank you for the contributions so far. Can I just clarify, as you'll all know, I'm a huge advocate for affordable housing in the district, have argued long and hard when the 2032 budget said there would be no more affordable housing that this council or its successor would be building. So I don't think there's any doubt about the principle of having affordable homes. However, I'm confused about the strategy and how sites come forward and the criteria we're using for selection of sites. At the July Cabinet Housing Committee, where New Homes presented, this project wasn't even on the list. It was not visible to any members. So how has this project come forward as the priority project for the affordable housing team when we have many others on the list that may deliver additional homes? I'd really like to understand, and I'm sure fellow members would, what is the decision process? What are the criteria that you're using to select this one versus another, and therefore think this is less risky than another? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. This is one of many schemes on our pipeline, and we're progressing all our schemes, well, a lot of schemes in tandem. It just so happens that we've managed to get the architecture scoping and the cost estimate back for this in time for this cabinet, and that's what's, meant that we're able to bring it forward at this.
So would you be able to help us understand what those criteria are? And if you were working on this, why was that not visible to us at Cabinet Housing in the New Homes update just a few weeks ago? Thank you.
So the housing development strategy, I can certainly share the key headlines of that for after this meeting, if that would be helpful. And that sets out the criteria around things such as build cost and viability, but also housing need, which is obviously incredibly important. So we can, I can certainly perhaps do a summary to you at the end of the next couple of weeks, so that you can see our decision criteria, if that would be helpful.
I think it would be very helpful to all of us to understand that, if that's possible. Thank you. And also, is there a reason why you didn't share it at the July meeting where many of us were in attendance? Thank you.
I don't think so. No, I think as Ms. Egan said, it's come forward. We're ready to progress with it. So let's crack on. I mean, I think, as I say, we have a very long pipeline of some schemes, which some are more developed than others. Some are really aspirational. Some are just finger in the air, you know, and that's only right. And things move up and down, and we rate them according to viability and deliverability. And some come up more quickly than others. I don't think there's anything untoward that's gone on here. We just happen to have a scheme that's looking good and ready to go.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I have concerns about this viability assessment that we haven't seen. First of all, on the running costs, we've got BNG and we've got Public Realm on the site and going through the site. Both of those add to the maintenance costs and the security costs, I would suggest as well. In the building viability, we've got the water table. Flats are going to need ventilation in the future. The energy conservation is a given, but how will the ventilation be managed in the flats, especially in such a congested development and in combination with the security risks as well? I'm also worried about the value of the site being transferred from the general fund, because surely when it has a planning consent given against it, the value of that site goes up quite dramatically. How has that been assessed? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I mentioned that earlier in terms of appropriations before my time, but I believe the Chesil Lodge was a previous general fund car park site, was it? It was appropriated from the general fund to the HRA, so clearly this council has experience of that. The market value of the site will be determined by the planning consent, as I said earlier. There isn't a planning consent at the moment. We need to design a scheme, make a planning application. If there's a consent received, that will be used to value the site.
So if that site is worth 2 and 6 at the moment, and it's worth £15 or those proportions once it's got planning consent, has that been taken into account in the viability assessment?
Yes.
Liz, our finance lead, also wants to make a comment, I think.
I was only going to just reiterate maybe a couple of points that Mr. Hendy has already made. So we haven't done a business case for this. It's too early in the process for us to have done a business case, and that's why there is no business case before you this evening. What we have done is an initial high-level appraisal, and Mr. Hendy's already covered some of the very early assumptions we make around how many properties do we think would go on this site, what do we think the market rate of building those would be, and what the income would be, what do we think the value of the car park would be, and on as an appropriation from the general fund to the HRA. So that is one of the things that we need to determine when we come back with the full business case. But just to reassure members, any appropriation between the general fund and the HRA is viewed as if it's an arm's length transaction with a third party, so it won't be to the detriment of the general fund or the HRA. So just to provide you hopefully with some comfort there.
And Chairman, the running costs with BNG and Public Realm and ventilation in the flats, how much is that being taken into account in the viability?
Thank you, Councillor Power. Yes, it has been taken into account in the viability as much as we can at this high level stage. Things like ventilation and security are obviously more detailed design matters that would be taken into account through the next stage of the process, but the cost of those have been factored in. Yes.
Councillor Clear.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back to this, given that 480,000 is a significant sum for professional fees and site investigations before planning permission is secured, what controls, milestones and reporting?
Thank you, Councillor Clear. So again, those are all matters that we'd need to consider at this next stage, which we'd need to do a lot of survey work, a lot of feasibility and due diligence work to understand better access, flooding, archaeology, all the quite rightly matters and risks that have been raised by the committee tonight. So we're already anticipating that within the 480,000. I've mentioned the New Homes Board meeting, which sits every 2 months. So I report into that regularly, so that there's visibility on the projects that we're looking at. And this would be one of those projects amongst others. So that would hopefully, the idea is that it prevent abortive costs from taking place as far as possible.
On that one, can I ask, are the New Homes Board minutes, are they publicly available?
No, it's more of an internal programme meeting.
Councillor Lamy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little concerned on the allowance for the initial investigation, because that site does have a big flooding problem. But it's not necessarily runoff water, it's control of the sewage and everything else. Because last time we had a lot of flooding in that area, St Bede's had to be closed and a number of the houses because water comes up through the drains. And when we had a planning application before the planning committee, we made special arrangements for that particular house that is on the edge of the site. So we want to be really sure that the budget is going to be a proper budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lamming. So we have a flood risk assessment from July 2024, which I recognise is now 2 years out of date, but that would be the sort of report and survey that we'd need to update as a result of the decision from Cabinet next week. So, you know, we have the evidence we have at the moment, which is okay, I'd say 2 years out of date. It's not too bad, but it's obviously not appropriate for submitting a new planning application. So that's the sort of thing we need to spend some money on, essentially.
I mean, the big flooding was way before that, so you need to go back into the records and double check that, if you wouldn't mind.
So the flood risk assessment picks up on the whole history of the site, so it covers everything that's happened up to that point. But obviously we'd need to do a new one to make sure that we're properly up to date. But thank you for raising it.
Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for reminding us that this site is actually allocated in the local plan, and it was allocated for 30 dwellings, as indeed there are many sites that we all have around the district. I'm slightly troubled, however, that you're now proposing over 40 dwellings. That's a 46% increase on a proposal that was consulted on and residents responded to. I've seen that on another site already in the few short months of the plan somewhere else, where the number of residents being proposed are doubling. So residents are being consulted at the local plan level on one level of housing, but when it comes to building, we're now as a council proposing to significantly increase that. If I were a resident, I'd feel rather demoralised about that. Then I was asked a question, I answered it and said 30 were fine, and then you're proposing 46% increase. How can we justify that? And would you be intending to do further consultation with residents to assure them that that is the right number for that site? I appreciate you want to get as many on there as possible to help viability and density, but I think we need to be clear with our residents. We're telling them one thing and then very shortly proposing something else. That doesn't seem very straightforward to me. Thank you.
Well, in response, it's not just about viability and density. It's about providing the maximum possible number of quality homes for our residents. You know, we've talked a lot about how pro-affordable housing we are in this council. And we had, in June of 2026, an architectural firm commissioned. They refreshed their previous piece of work that was done for the local plan. And there's a really good quality scheme. We've talked about how we need to generate a full business case and we need to carry out additional works to see precisely all of the things that the committee has quite rightly pointed out we need to understand fully before we progress this. It's only right as we get further down through the scheme that we refine the proposals. And in this case, we think there's a very good scheme for 44 homes on a site that, where the local plan stage we thought was about 30. So only naturally, as we look at this sort of stuff and we refine the programme, we get a much better view of what's deliverable on the site, given the very specific constraints on the site. Ms. Egan.
Thank you. If I can just add to that as well. Yes, we really want to maximise the amount of council housing we can put on the site, but not at the expense of, you know, doing an inappropriate scheme. 44 is not set in stone. That is just what the basis of this report was run on. So please don't think this is absolutely a 44 unit scheme. That's just what the most recent capacity study from our architects has shown. But they're working on the data we have, which is not fully formed. We need to do a lot more due diligence work to fully understand flood, archaeology, etc. So we'd be going through a pre-app process, then we'd be going through a public consultation process before we even thought about submitting a planning application. So it's not that we're just going to put it in without any further consultation.
Maybe Councillor Reach would take the message back to his fellow portfolio holder on the local plan, that the message to residents is that we're putting numbers into the local plan for dwellings and then increasing that density in many places already. And that, I'm afraid, doesn't give a good impression of how we're approaching it. Maybe you want to share that point with her. Thank you.
I will gladly share that point with her. Mrs. Egan has just... No, let me just respond to that.
No,
Mrs. Egan
Councillor Reach,
well, Mrs. Egan,
this is my meeting.
I was asked to do something in particular.
I did not ask you to respond.
Well, I was asked to do something in particular.
It was a comment. I have not asked you to respond, so please just wait.
Okie dokie.
Councillor Atchwell, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is to the officers. Given that Winchester City Council will possibly cease to exist in 2028, what assurance can officers provide that spending £485,000 now will not be wasted if the new authority decides not to take the scheme forward? Thank you.
May I respond to that?
Of course.
Thank you. On this point, we've said repeatedly, and through economy and housing, various other committees, we have to accept that there is a risk. There is an inherent risk here. We won't be the people who made that decision. Some of us maybe, many of us won't. But building on the work that Councillor Horrell's done for so long, what we've got to do is maintain a pipeline of housing schemes. I think it's a very fair point, and it's something the committee needs to assure itself that actually you're happy with this. I think what we can't do, and it's something Councillor Horrell and I have discussed a lot, is we can't just pull the shutters down and say that's it. I think we have to accept that there is an inherent risk to this, but I think carrying out the work, doing a good full business case, will demonstrate that this is a good scheme. It's a sustainable scheme. It's in the right place. It's the right mix. It's the right mix of tenures and the right mix of property types. So I think the committee needs to be happy that that's the case, and we recognise that it may be a successor authority that decides this, but by demonstrating that it's a quality scheme, that's the best way to assure we get the affordable housing that we need in the right place.
I've got a follow-up. So the 485, can that be recovered if the scheme is dropped?
We've talked about there's gateways and projects. Once we get to, it's not a big slug of money that goes up front. There are individual packages of work to do with architects, pre-planning, flooding analysis, all that kind of thing. Obviously, if it becomes clear at some point that there is a showstopper, then the work will stop. So it's not a case it all goes out up front, but that work will need to be done, whether or not, if that work demonstrates the scheme can't progress. We don't think that's very likely, but if it does, that money is nugatory. So it won't be recovered because that's being paid to professional services to carry out the kind of surveys that we would need to assure ourselves that the scheme can go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hall, please.
Given that many of the comments this evening have been about the potential risks and the finances, if Scrutiny Committee were asking for a stage payment, as it were, through that fee proposal, and in the exempt paper, when we come to that, we can see the various tranches of work. If you were happy to accept that there were stage payments, as it were, I think that would be reassuring to us that risk was being mitigated and managed effectively over what will be a sort of discovery for you about the various elements. Would that be acceptable to the portfolio holder and the officers?
I think, I'm not sure we can quite do stage payments. I'm not an officers, but there are individual discrete bits of work that up together will form the planning application. So I think we may be able to share a project plan, dare I say, of the kind of, going to an architect here, a flooding engineer here, biodiversity person here, or whatever it needs to be. So it's not a kind of staged process, but it will at least set out what we'll be doing when and over what timescale, if that would please the committee.
Ms. Keys.
Yeah, if I may, so Cabinet are going to be asked to approve this budget. That doesn't mean that officers are going to spend all of that money. So Ms. Egan and the team have estimated how much they think it would cost us to do all of the work that we need to do to get to planning. If at any time the indications coming back from those pieces of work suggest that, you know, our initial viability assessment was completely wrong, then the team won't just plough ahead with this. The team will bring another report back to Cabinet and say, we thought, you know, initially we thought this was a goer, you've approved this budget, things have changed, we're no longer progressing with this. So the Cabinet will be approving that budget. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will be spent. They won't plough on regardless if the information coming back suggests that the viability assessment was completely wrong.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Murphy, did I miss you earlier? Oh, okay, well then I'm going to go to Councillor Basso first then, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to inquire, the land the car park is on was initially identified as being for social housing. So the question is, why wasn't that part of the HRA at that point if it was going to be social housing? And also, if the intention is to make it into social affordable housing now, what prevents us from apportioning that to the house HRA at this point, and making that land then within that account, so that it is then, you know, sort of held within that through a local government reorganisation?
They're both good questions. I mean, I think, do officers, does the corporate memory go back to mid 70s? I think Lynn said. I mean, it was certainly 87 when the Brooks construction, when it was underway. I'm not sure we remember back that far. Perhaps you do.
I don't, and I wouldn't want to speak over Ms. Keys here because obviously she's section 141. But my understanding is the HRA can't own and operate a car park. Is that a fair thing to say? And that's why it's held by the general fund, because it, albeit it's a temporary car park, it is an operating car park that brings in revenue for the council, and therefore it needs to be held by the general fund. We're not allowed to appropriate it until we have a planning consent and we're about to put a spade in the ground. So the HRA, my understanding is, isn't allowed to own it and run it as a car park, if that helps.
So was the land originally in the HRA and it got transferred back to the general fund to allow it to run the car park?
That I don't know.
I mean, I think HRAs have existed since the Housing Act 1984, I believe. So I think if it was before that time, I'm not sure an HRA would have existed. So this is a guess, but I would assume if it was the 70s, it's before the Housing Act established HRAs.
Councillor Murphy.
Okay, thanks. Just going back to the previous question and really a more basic clarification. I mean, we have some numbers in exempt papers. I'm not suggesting we talk about those as numbers, but I think I would certainly find it useful to understand how you constructed that, whether there was input from professionals involved, or is this based on experience, and in a sense how it was built up, so that we can understand this bit about how it may sort of feed through as the money is spent and how it can be cost controlled.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Murphy. So it's a combination of our in-house experience and external cost consultants that have enabled us to pull this table together. It is in line with what any developer would need to spend on a residential redevelopments, brownfield land redevelopment site in a similar location. So we're basing it on broadly on percentages of the build cost on most of the items, and then some of the items aren't percentages, they're actually lump sum amounts. It depends on the item that you're interested in, but yes, it's a scheme of costs that is in line with market, essentially.
On that note, there is an exempt appendix to this report. Are there any questions that people wanted to ask on that exempt appendix? I know there's been some general questions which you've been able to answer without bringing up the exempt items. Councillor Horrell?
Chair, I do have one question as it relates to that paper. Thank you.
Okay, can ask if we go into Councillor Pat? Okay, let's. I would like to bring this one to a close. So if you can be relatively succinct, please, that would be great. Thank you.
I'm wearing my hat today. I'm seeking reassurance that the model of provision anticipated for this site matches to your need for central Winchester accommodation, both as regards the houses and the flats. As a corollary to that, we know we've been doing some modelling on the anticipated rise in housing need for one-bedroom households. And as a consequence of that, we should expect that there will be more people living in such flats that will need carers. Now, Mrs. Mellish made the point about parking spaces. We know delivery drivers can't walk more than 12 feet. End of. Carers do not get paid for their travelling time at the moment. And I have severe reservations about how both delivery drivers and carers will be able to help or deliver to people living on this site, and how can that be addressed? Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if I may, it's a very good point, and there is a broader discussion to be had about our ageing population and the changing demands for care. I would say what I said in my introduction, that the car park for River Park is possibly not even 100 yards from this site. So I take the point that delivery drivers are paid 30 pence a delivery and are not going to waste their time. However, there is parking very nearby. Deliveries increasingly, particularly in the city centre, are made to lockers. It's more efficient for delivery firms. They've sprung up all over the city. You'll see them all over the place and out in the district as well. So I think, the model of having hundreds and hundreds of vans circulating around all day, every day, and drivers tossing parcels over fences, I think is probably coming to an end. So I take the point, but I think there is some limited parking. It is for disabled people, but there will be an opportunity. The point on care is a broader point and something that I think we need to think about more carefully in the longer term. So I don't have an answer for you now. Officers may, so I can't give you an answer for that now, I'm afraid.
If I may just comment on your need question, your first part. So there's a table in the paper which you'll have seen that shows the need across the district. There is a strong one-bed need in this location. At the moment, the scheme has predominantly one beds, but as we go through the process, we may look to increase that. We're very much looking at the need. That's the key thing, what we try to achieve.
Right. So in order to ask the question on the exempt section of the paper, we need to pass a resolution that the public be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following items of business, because it is likely that if the members of the public were present, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined by section 100I and schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. Can I ask for that to be moved and seconded? Super. Right. Matthew, can I ask? Thank you for your patience while we did that. It's very evil. Right, so I've got some potential recommendations from the committee based on what we've been talking about, from themes emerging from the discussion, which I can run through. But before I do that, were there any last points that anybody wanted to make? Councillor Gordon-Smith.
I was on the committee on the Dyson Drive one, and I think there is a serious risk that needs to be headed off before planning. And I can understand there's going to be a huge furore about taking away city centre car parking. I've mentioned I'm completely in support of this, but I think, you know, forewarned is forearmed, and people get very agitated about parking issues, and there's going to be letters to the Chronic saying it's going to ruin the city centre, you know, it's going to be empty shops everywhere, etc., etc. And I think that will lead to pressure on members on the planning committee, and I think one has to get a really good message out there about this. I think that's really all I would say. Thank you.
If there are any comments for debate, this would be the time to make them. Yes. Councillor Clean.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to say that I do support taking this proposal forward. St Peter's Car Park is an allocated brownfield site with real potential to provide, I think, much needed homes in a sustainable city centre location. And the proposed investment will enable surveys, design and feasibility work needed to develop a strong and deliverable scheme. The £480,000 commitment is significant, so it is right that expenditure is managed through clear cost controls, staged approvals and regular reporting, I think, is needed. But with those safeguards in place, I am pleased to support the next stage and the opportunity to demonstrate the scheme's planning merits, viability and value for money before any decision is taken to proceed to construction. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I do support the removal of parking. We've seen the report today in the press, how much children's health has improved as a consequence of the ULEZ in London, which I think is something all councillors should be aware of. We do have an air quality problem in Winchester, and I'm afraid if you want to live in the city, you have to learn to walk or use public transport. However, Chairman, I do think we should ask for further consideration of carers parking, which will be needed, I think, as we all get older. But this is a risk, but I'm content that the risk is managed, and we need to take that risk in order to meet a housing need. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Councillor Batho.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I fully support the proposal that's in front of us this evening. I think the report itself identifies that there's a need for over 1,000 one-bedroom properties in the Winchester area. This, in conjunction with the proposal that came forward earlier about the Bar End sale, will provide over 100 of those. So that's at least or almost 10% of that number that we will be providing in a very short space of time. I think also in terms of the car parking, I just made a quick addition of the places available in Tower Street, Chesil Street, Middlebrook and Brook Street. Those 4 car parks themselves add up to just under 1,600 spaces. The 165 spaces in the St Peter's car park, therefore, are around about 10% of that. I can't see that our car parks are 90% full at all the times, and therefore that 10% I think would be quite easily absorbed in those other 4 car parks, which are in very close proximity to St Beans itself. I think, as Councillor Power was saying, there are growing evidence of the need to reduce traffic within city centres, and this would actually help with that. And actually, strange enough, I think reducing the parking in St Peter's would actually have a beneficial effect in that the car park actually requires cars to come onto North Walls, and therefore the traffic lights hold the traffic that are coming down from City Road and into North Walls. Possibly as a part of this, the Hampshire County Council could be asked to prioritise the lights and actually reduce the number of times that the traffic going down North Walls then stops. So I think there are a number of benefits this proposal would bring, not only in terms of the accommodation that it provides to our residents, and I think that from Councillor Horror's point of view, the fact that we're actually increasing the number of housing that's available is actually a benefit. Okay, we might have made a number sort of available to our residents, but the fact that considering the number of homes that are going to be needed under the new government's requirements, the more that we can get into an area, the better. So I wholeheartedly support this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bathurst. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. And just to say thank you to Mrs Egan for saying you'll help us understand how you prioritise the various projects going forward, as we may have others that we're asked to consider. Clearly, we are in need of housing, so a scheme delivering more council houses can only be a positive thing on a local plan that has that as a designation. I would join Mrs Mellish in saying, when you're looking at the viability, please look at social rents as strongly as possible. We know with the current cost of living pressures, that will be really helpful. And thank you for to Councillor Reach for accepting that if we can have a sort of stages and gates process to the investment in the fees, that will be managing the risk and I think alleviate some of the concerns that we have raised this evening about spending monies that ultimately don't deliver against this important project. So I think if we can commit to doing that as an amendment at Cabinet, that would be very well received. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you all for the committee for good questions and comments. Thank you. So I've tried to capture these all in some recommendations from the committee. So I'm going to read them out to you and you can tell me if you agree. So I've got 4 recommendations that I've captured. I'm afraid they're a little bit wordy, but I'll go through them. The first one's on the financial modelling and the fund and so on. So the committee supports further investigation of the St Peter's car park site for social and affordable housing, but notes that the current report does not provide members with a sufficiently complete picture of the overall project economics. Cabinet is therefore requested to ensure that the final business case clearly sets out the total estimated development costs, the valuation and transfer arrangements relating to the site, all funding sources, subsidy requirements, expected rental income, borrowing requirements, the impact on HRA borrowing capacity and long-term HRA business plan sustainability, and sensitivity analysis for key risks. That's the first recommendation. Is that agreed? Agreed. Second recommendation I've got is on the parking, because that's got raised a few. The committee requests that the final business case provide a clearer assessment of the impact on parking provision, parking income, and any consequential effects on the general fund. Is that agreed? That's a yes. Good, thank you. Third one, site investigation and delivery risks. The committee requests that the final business case include a comprehensive assessment of site-specific risks identified through the investigation phase, including archaeology, groundwater, flood risk, contamination, and any associated mitigation measures. together with an explanation of the impact of those risks on scheme viability, affordability and delivery timescales. Yeah, good. And the final one is really about the timing of all this. The committee, governance. The committee notes that the proposed sequence of approvals would allow the scheme to progress through planning and procurement stages before members have considered a documented business case for the overall project. The committee therefore requests that Cabinet receive an interim business case setting out estimated development costs, funding sources, subsidy requirements, viability assumptions and key risks, together with clear decision gateways at which the continuing viability and affordability of the scheme can be reviewed before further expenditure is committed. We've all acknowledged that there's these internal ones, but this is actually formally requesting that, or suggesting that there is also a public one, as a public interim case as well. Is that agreed? Okay. Any other recommendations? Hopefully,
Chair, sorry to interrupt that. I just think I'm not clear, and the odd looks that I'm getting from officers, there's not really clarity on that last point in terms of the governance. You're asking for an interim report on the business case.
Yeah.
So what? But you've already had assurances that you'll have the project plan in terms of those cases. You've had assurance from the Director of Finance in terms of if at any of those there is a stop because one of those survey reports says no, that will stop.
Yeah.
You've had reassurance, you've had other reassurance from housing in terms of what those surveys will do. So at what interim stage can officers report to you? I'm not clear. Liz, have you got more?
Sorry, but you're asking us to sign, you're suggesting that the council today signs off without seeing a business case, £480,000.
Yeah.
And to trust you to do all of these things. And we do trust you. We trust our officers. However, we also have a responsibility as council members, our elected responsibility to monitor the progress of these reports. So that is why we're asking. I'm suggesting that we put this to request an interim business case be put forward before the planning permission is, before an application is put in for planning permission.
So if I just mention again, as I did earlier, Ms Egan has pulled together the budget of necessary spend to do the surveys in order for us to pull together the business case. So I cannot bring to you this evening a business case because there are too many unknowns. So what Ms Egan has done is estimate the cost of putting together all that information in order to bring forward that case, and that at the full business case opportunity, another cabinet report will be brought forward with a go, no go at that stage.
So that report can come to scrutiny as this report have. So my query is the interimness of what you're requiring. Are you requiring something in between those stages? Because I don't see where that adds value to the decision making process. It will be a go, no go decision based on all of the works. And I won't go into the details of the exempt appendix before scrutiny, before Cabinet make that final decision. On that final decision, planning permission will then be applied for, etc., etc.
Agreed, but this authorization is to they're seeking authorization to prepare and submit a planning application for the redevelopment. So you're proposing that the members only see, right now as it is, as it's written, members will only see a full business case after the planning permission has been submitted. I don't think that's acceptable personally, and if the members of the committee agree, then we will be putting that forward as a recommendation. It is up to Cabinet to decide if they accept that recommendation.
Chair, if I may, I think we're getting a bit lost here in interim. I think I'm looking at officers here. This is work to develop a full business case. We've agreed to share a project plan so we can see, and I think we've also agreed that if GeoFizz or whatever comes back and says no, then we stop and we'll let the committee know that that's the case, although we think that's unlikely. The purpose of this, of what we're seeking here, or what we will be seeking, I should say, is the funds required to generate that full business case in accordance with the normal appraisal process we would do for any scheme of this nature. I'm looking at officers here. Would it then be unreasonable to bring the full business case, to share the full business case at that point, subject to commercial confidentialities and the usual things with members? Because that might go some way to address your concerns. We need to be a little bit careful here, though. You know, we are up against it, and we need to recognise that we can provide as much information as we want at any time. But we have had criticism in the past of how slow we can be, and we've had criticism of how expensive we are as a developer to do this sort of stuff. You know, we need to recognise that additional steps and additional work add cost and add time to these schemes. So I think we can share a full business case, subject to finding the correct governance structure through which to share that with members. But I just would caution members to be very careful about adding too much sand into the gears here, because, as I say, we are an expensive developer, and this is part of the reason for it. So that would be my challenge back. But I look to officers as to how we can get the full business case to members, you know, through some governance structure we already have.
Chair, it would be helpful, I think, for officers to understand what your main point of concern is. It is about spending the £480,000 of fees to get to a point. So we have a planning permission, we have valuations, and therefore we've gone to tender, so we know whether the business case exists that we can bring back, or is it the actual business case? Because the report makes clear that we will be providing a final business case based on a planning permission and a tender price and everything, and the scheme will not proceed until that takes place and is presented back to Cabinet to reconsider. That's already a recommendation, and the report's going to.
So can I just come back to? Yeah, I will ask Councillor Todd. I think what I'm hearing is that you want there to be a more explicit decision point before a planning application is submitted. So when all that evidence has been collected about flooding and routes and the outline of the outline costs that we're talking about, not the final application, not with planning application, not when we've gone to procurement. What I'm hearing is you want to know that there's an interim step at that point where the decision will be looked at by members in some form. Is that what I'm hearing? And the problem we have here is that business case, full business case, outline business case are big technical terms that have a very specific meaning, you know, defined by the government's 5 cases rule, the way the Treasury asks us to make decisions. So if we ask for that scale of business case, as opposed to, for example, an interim financial assessment and review of information collected ahead of submission or whatever, but what I'm hearing is that you want a decision step ahead of planning applications. You want a decision step when we kind of know where we are before we actually sink everything into a planning application and a full tendering of that cost, and then come back and say, it's this, do you agree? Is that what I'm hearing? Yes. So I think what we can take away, or what we would be happy to take as a recommendation from the committee for discussion with officers, is a decision point ahead of planning application submission, or member involvement in decision, but ahead of planning application involvement. Now, I haven't had a chance to refer that to officers, but it feels like what I was hearing from people. I don't know if officers may want to provide perspective on that, and whether I've just said something hugely impractical. But
Chair, just to be, I think the majority of the fee that we're recommending here, the £480,000, will be spent to get to the stage that's just been outlined. So if your concern is that you want to see some more stages before the majority of the 480 is spent, then that's going to be quite difficult.
can I suggest that we've taken, yeah, we will take this away. We have a bit of time to sort it out. We've been asked for a very specific timetable. And I think what I'm hearing is what you don't want is a big black box, and then you get to the end and it's all been spent, and that there's not some kind of process to check in on that. But I suggest if we look at the timetable in detail and see if there's a practical point where there's a way of taking the decision in public, perhaps, for example, through cabinet housing, something like that, that might be helpful. Thank you, Councillor Todd. I think we will, I propose that we still put this in as a recommendation, and then it's up to Cabinet to decide whether they accept it or not, and or modify it slightly. Councillor Power, I can see you've got some concern.
Chairman, I think the problem arises with the recommendation 2 to Cabinet, which is authorise the corporate head of management to prepare and submit a planning application for the redevelopment of St Peter's car park. However, in the paragraph before that, before the recommendations, it says a final business case report will be presented to the Cabinet or shadow authority or successor body, before the Cabinet decides to proceed with the scheme. And it seems to me that we are asking for scrutiny to see that final business case before Cabinet give authority to proceed. So it's recommendation 2 that is causing me grief, because it says that Mr Hendy can get on with it, which is in direct contradiction to the paragraph just above the recommendations.
I think we're making the same point. I think Councillor Power, yes.
Maybe we need to rephrase our recommendation then to say that scrutiny give the final business case a good going over before it goes.
Can I suggest that if we're going to be really governance purists, we're asking for an executive decision point, which you can scrutinise should you choose to. And we need to get this proportionate, because what we don't want is a huge thing. And it, frankly, given that opposition are represented, Cabinet Housing might be the appropriate route. So write whatever you want in your recommendations. I think we've heard the intent of what you're saying. What you're saying is don't get right to the end of the process before anybody gets involved again. There needs to be a check-in point somewhere along the way. There would be anyway. But I think if we're clear about the decision flow, and as the information comes in and when that might be, we can discuss that at Cabinet and we'll discuss that with officers in advance and see if there's a pragmatic, light touch, non-delaying way of doing this.
And I do think it's very reassuring that Mrs. Keyes said that if any stages of the risk assessment and the work, if any of that falls by the wayside because it isn't acceptable in some reason, then you would, in your role as our officer, would say, actually, no, we need to stop and take stock. So I think that staging of the 480,000 process that you've said you will oversee is really important.
So thank you. So I've modified that last recommendation to see what it sounds. The committee notes the proposed sequence of approvals would allow the scheme to progress through planning and procurement before members have considered a documented business case for the overall project. That's the concern. The committee therefore requests the Cabinet receive a member requests a Cabinet decision point before the planning application is submitted. Remove the word business case, because I can see that was causing problems. The Cabinet decision point before the planning application is submitted, setting out estimated development costs, funding sources, blah, 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 together with clear decision gateways at which the continuing viability and affordability of the scheme can be reviewed before further expenditure is committed. Are we content with that committee? Super. So that is what we will put forward to as our recommendations to Cabinet, and I'm sure there'll be some discussions between now and then about the practical implementation.
Okay, yeah, of course. Chair, I was just going to say, I'm much clearer on that wording. I think it was interim that had that had me concerned, so I'm much clearer on that wording. There will be a lot for officers to do to take away that, because obviously in my head already, if we're taking an earlier decision and then getting planning permission, some of the assumptions might change in between that time, because there is even a 3 month, 6 months lapse of time between those two. So it might mean that actually those costs do increase because we have to revisit with some of those valuations and assessments and if things have changed. So I just want to put in there that I believe there could be a risk that those risks that the costs could increase because we're having to do 2 check-ins, not just one, but the fundamental legwork where I think the majority of the fees would be incurred would still remain the same.
Thank you. And And I think I would say that would be balanced out by the fact that sometimes there are concerns from members that decisions are made and projects have progressed too far before members get a chance to have input.
Yeah.
So I think that balances out the risk.
Absolutely understand that, but if I didn't say to you that I believe there could be some slightly increased cost from having a double gateway, then I think that the officers would be accused of not giving you all the information on the evening. But no, absolutely happy to take that away. We'll look at how we can practically do that with the cabinet member and with the lead officers. Chair, thank you.
Right, thank you. That concludes item 6. Right, on to item 7.
Chair, should we stop for a break, please?
Sorry?
Can we stop for a 5-minute break?
I think that's a great idea. Let's
Thank
have
you.
but we will just keep it at 5 minutes, please. So 7 Right, can I ask everybody to regroup, please? Right, so Councillor Batho, can I ask you to rejoin the committee, please? And then we can restart. Right, so this next item is Central Winchester Regeneration, the updated business case. We will start with the public questions and comments. We have 3 people who have asked to speak on this one. So can I ask Mr. Tate to come forward, please, first?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee. In truth, I just don't know where to start. I reread the comments I made at Scrutiny on the 19th of January 2026, and my concerns, none of them have been abated whatsoever. Everything about this is wrong and unacceptable. No affordable housing. I was harangued from the earlier scheme because I argued that we should take the affordable housing off-site. This scheme, because of deteriorating commercial viability, there isn't an off-site affordable housing scheme. There is no affordable housing on that. Councillor Todd harangued Shorewood Homes for their 48 houses in Pitt Manor and said it's absolutely unacceptable. That was proposed to give £2.1 million. This isn't coming close to it. Where else do I go to? I'm just picking out bits of this. Winchester Nest. I think I raised that question previously a number of times, and it's quoted in the revised business case, Winchester Nest. No definition of Winchester Nest. There isn't a definition of Winchester Nest. The retention of King's Walk, I accept that it cannot be knocked down purely for financial reasons. Nothing to do with embedded carbon. It's purely the height of the building. If you knocked it down, you'd need to build it higher, and that just doesn't stack up financially. Says somewhere it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. No, it's not. This is a shambolic attempt to dig ourselves out of a derailed scheme from 2014, which was an exemplar scheme, which was going to give public benefit. It was going to repave the Broadway. It was going to deliver affordable housing off-site. Well, there are some practicalities in the agreement. I look at the long stop dates. The planning long stop date is March 25 plus 42 months. Best of luck with that one. We are not into August 26. So you've got to get your planning application in by March next year, and you're giving yourselves less than 2 years to get that through the system. Well, I spend a little time looking at planning. I say best of luck, you're going to need more than the prevailing ring. There's nothing about this scheme which has merit to it. So I think you need to strongly consider option 2B, and option 2B is do not proceed under the development agreement, and Winchester City Council sells the site outright. You don't have the no disrespect to officers, I'm not trying to belittle officers, but there is not the expertise within the officer class to deal with it. Thank you, Chair. abort it.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. We also, Councillor Godfrey, please.
Always hard to feel to follow. Mr. Thank you. The report states that there are no options worth considering. This is really never true, and scrutiny needs to challenge the lack of options. Doing nothing might be embarrassing, but is it really not worth considering? It may be the least worst choice, but while the business case has decided that there is no cost to the public purse of going forward with this scheme, because the £25 million previously spent by the council in buying up the CWR land has already been spent, so there's no new cost. So the business case ignores these sunk costs. That's like putting your savings in the bank and then finding that you can't withdraw it, and the bank won't give you any interest anyway. We are losing over £650,000 a year income from rental. The business case states that because that 650k per annum will not be missed by this council, it is acceptable for the council just to give it away. This lost revenue may not impact on the services provided by the City Council over the remaining 2 years of its life. But that does not mean that the loss of that income will not be bitterly missed by the unitary council that replaces it. It is short-term thinking like this that will make the running of a new unitary extremely difficult for those of us that will be left carrying that can. And even after the public money has been ploughed in, including another £4.5 million of SIL contributions from the district pot, the developers are struggling to make this viable. Set aside the challenges of convincing other developers to provide affordable housing when the City Council refuses to follow its own policies. If this major scheme starts with such marginal viability, indicated so clearly by not being able to provide affordable housing, how much financial headwind will the scheme tolerate before it proves impossible to continue? A 5% increase in development costs and a 5% reduction in sales income can result from a bad week in the Straits of Hormuz. Since 2020, construction costs in this country have gone up by more than 30%. Starting a project while balancing on a financial tightrope does not seem sensible. And what is Winchester getting for the 25 million it has invested? No affordable housing, no income streams to replace that 650k per annum lost, no prospect of capital return in the future, no hotel to boost local businesses, no community space to talk of, no obvious environmental improvements, no passageways that will lead people anywhere that they will want to go, half the most unattractive buildings on the site not even being replaced, virtually no new jobs are being created, and those jobs that are, according to the business case, will not bring sufficient income to allow the workers to afford to live in Winchester, let alone to live in one of the 230 odd shiny new £1 million flats. The Scrutiny Committee needs to be satisfied that the district will genuinely benefit from the council's huge investment in this clearly tenuous scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Councillor Lee. Councillor Lee, can I just check? Are you did you have some comments to make in the exempt, under the exempt, or just in this session?
I was going to listen to what was said and then make a final decision, if that's all right.
No, you have to. You can't do
Okay,
that.
in that case, I will declare I will not use the exempt session. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Scrutiny Committee. I'll get straight to the points. As already been said, the first concern probably is the most significant, and that is no affordable housing. is currently committed despite the original ambition. Before accepting the major loss of this public benefit, can I ask what sensitivity test has been undertaken on density, massing, phasing, tenure mix, and other options to recover at least some affordable housing while respecting Winchester's historic setting? My second point is the council's financial exposure. The scheme now generates no residual land value, while the council will progressively lose about 650k of existing income. The business case also excludes the recently acquired St. Clement's Surgery and proposed Marks and Spencer car park acquisition. I hope I'm correct in saying that. If so, is the total whole project financial exposure to the council truly set out, including lost income, SIL, acquisition and borrowing, with explanation as to why all these elements are not captured in the business case? Third, the benefit cost ratio. This is important because £2.12 for every £1 can easily sound like a financial return to the council. It isn't. It is an estimate of wider economic and social value. The updated proposal now runs for 60 years and relies heavily on increased footfall and commercial GVA. I believe it assumes a 5% increase in footfall, producing, I think it's about 105 million of present value benefit. The 2021 appraisal linked that 5% uplift to a new hotel and conference activity, yet the hotel has disappeared from the scheme. So what evidence supports retaining that 5% footfall assumption in the new scheme? And how sensitive is the £2.12 BCR, the benefit ratio, if that assumption proves optimistic? If 5% footfall assumption is reduced to say 2.5%, what would be the BCR outcome? I suggest that tests how resilient the economic case actually is. Should that be done, or has it been done? Related to that, how has the loss of the hotel been reflected in assessing the original overnight tourism objective? My fourth point, the report tells us that that engagement events have taken place and that the feedback has influenced the final proposals. So will Cabinet and members see the detailed feedback and the developers' responses before Cabinet is asked to approve submission of the planning application on the 25th of August? Cabinet, I believe, should have the latest information for making its decision. My fifth point, energy and climate resilience. This was discussed at 16th of March Cabinet Regeneration Committee. I welcome the stated ambitions of net zero, operational embodied carbon, a fabric first approach, heat pumps, PV and BREEAM excellence. However, Appendix D still shows the detailed phase 1 energy and sustainability information as incomplete. When will these commitments become measurable, enforceable specifications? And can we be assured that the viability pressures will not dilute or remove them? And following this summer's exceptional temperatures, how is this scheme going to be designed to prevent overheating and urban heat island effects over the lifetime of these buildings and public spaces? I could talk about buses, but I won't, because I know that solutions are still in the pipeline, but I don't think that should be overlooked. The new National Planning Policy Framework was published 2 days ago after the business case was prepared and contains materially strong provisions on climate adaptation, overheating, design and green infrastructure. Will the Council and Jigsaw now review the business case and propose planning application against the new NPPF? And will Cabinet receive an assessment of any material implications for taking its decision on the 25th of August? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. So I believe that Councillor Todd will now introduce this item, supported by Simon Hendy, Ken Baker and Emma Taylor. Also joining us is Matt Woolger from 3110. And no, wrong way around. Nick Walford from 3110 and Matt Woolger from Jigsaw. Over to you, Mr.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, so we have.
Sorry. I was just going to say, the councillors have. There was a member briefing on this on the CWR in the business case a few days ago, and I believe that committee members were either in attendance at the original briefing or have watched it since. So just bear that in mind with your comments, please. So committee members should be up to speed on this.
Although I think we may, for the public, have something to show people in a minute. So very quickly to run through, there are three key decisions and then some supporting enabling ones on this, or two really. One is that we are asking for, or that the Cabinet will be asked to approve the submission of the planning application as outlined in Appendix D, and we'll see more about that later on. And then the separate decision that relates to the lease of the M&S car park and how we access that in order to enable necessary bus infrastructure to be provided, although that sits outside the business case that you have in front of us today. This has been an incredibly long journey. I mean, this project started in the 90s, and we have made choices along the way. So there was an attempt in 2005 to sort of 2016, which was very financially focused and ended up making a load of decisions that were not popular with the public, I think it is safe to say, and with councillors. And so some of us here were involved in ending that scheme in about 2016. Then we had an SPD, and that made choices. I mean, there was talk about densities and heights. Already the SPD viability calculations, so the Deloitte document that was published on June 4th, 2018, it wasn't published, rather, it was an internal document, showed that it wasn't possible to recover the cost of land assembly and to deliver affordable housing. None of the viability options delivered that. So already the choices that we've made with the SPD meant that we had made a decision that we were going to be making less money in order to come up with a proposal that met the needs of the city and met the needs of the residents of the city. And I would say that that journey since 2016, and I know Councillor Horrell played a very important part in the early stages of it in defining the SPD, has been guided by the needs of the city and of the district. How we make the city stronger, that's the lens to look through, and the wider area stronger. Now, since then, we had the ambitious goals in the SPD, and we have ambitious goals in the brief that we put together that led to the procurement of Jigsaw, particularly the environmental standards that we set are above what would be nationally required. And in theory, we could dilute those, although they were the basis of the procurement. And again, decisions like opening up the waterways, plus the wider environmental goals that we looked for and valued in the procurement process to have financial consequences. What we could not have predicted was the change in global and national economic circumstances. Councillor Godfrey made reference earlier to the impact that there has been on construction costs. Wars in Ukraine and Iran, the effect they've had on fuel prices and energy costs mean that, and the effect they've had on the global economy basically mean that since, I think, 2021, the costs of construction have grown 5 times faster than incomes and revenues that people can expect from development. At the same time, we've moved to a world where places like Winchester find it considerably harder to access government funding than were part of the assumptions that we had in the past. And even though we're in a relatively challenging situation, we are unusual in that we actually are able to keep proceeding with a development project. Across the country, they are being cancelled or being put on hold. And as we know, locally and nationally, housing construction has slowed dramatically. So they are very difficult times, and I'm sure we can discuss that in more detail. But I think the right thing to do is to keep going, to drive ahead, to be ambitious for our city. And you will be hearing shortly from Matt Woolgar, from our development partner Jigsaw, about our ambitions and plans and the proposal that we want to authorise to take to planning. And I think it's also important to note that this is not the final financial case. We are not stopping working on this to find ways to improve the financial position. We have got a government that is talking a lot about regeneration and social housing and social rents. And our hope is that we see funding flows that start to follow from that. And indeed, we may touch on that later and believe that it could be possible. And as it says in paragraph 2.7, the financial position may change between now and land drawdown, which is the point at which land price, that certain parts of the financial model lock, because market conditions may change, development values may change, construction costs may change, other economics factors may change, and the grant funding environment may change. So we believe that those are all plausible options, that we need to be open to that, and they can be reflected in our financial picture. And as part of that, we will and are absolutely determined to keep working to improve our ability to deliver affordable homes. A big factor is whether the money is talked about. The government money talks as the money the government has talked about becomes available. That won't be all we look at. And, you know, there's no question that we are committed to affordable homes. You've had a discussion just now about another 42. That will take us over 500 since 2019. And that's without, for example, the 82 that we've talked about at the depot site. But ultimately, that isn't what we're asking for this evening. We're not locking the finances at this point. We're not even locking the picture in terms of affordable homes. What we're asking is, and this is where I think it would be useful to look at the plans, have we achieved what we want to in terms of a positive future for our city, for bringing new life to the timeless city as we talked about it? I believe we have, and I believe the plans we have in front of us do as well. We can't afford to stop and we can't afford to stand still. I believe we have plans that can take us forward, well connected, pedestrian friendly, bringing together homes, workplaces, culture, public areas, creating new public spaces within the city, opening up the environment, the waterways, strong and positive environmental impact, dramatically improving the part of the city that we're talking about in a way that is truly Winchester. And there may not be a logical written down definition of Winchesterness, but it is something we talk about a lot, and it's something that matters in terms of doing justice to our city. So others are stopping and delaying their plans. We will be asking Cabinet that we don't. It has been a difficult journey. It has been a long journey. It's not a journey that's over, but it is right to move forward to the next stage. And again, that's what I would want to propose to Cabinet. But I am interested in your views and the comments that you have and the areas you'd like us to explore. But before we get to that, I think it would be helpful if Matt Woolger takes us through the proposal that we want to take forward.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Chair. Before I start turning the pages on this, I think it's worth just giving a bit of sight to the committee. Just the number of other individuals that are working on this project. You quite often see myself or some of my sort of the day-to-day colleagues at Jigsaw, but it really is only just the tip of the iceberg. The slides that we'll be going through don't delve into the depths of the planning application. There's a very good reason for that. There are, we have on our deliverables list approximately 50 reports that are under preparation. There's around about 100 drawings that have in draft that are further being developed. There's approximately 25 different consultants that are regularly working week by week on the project. And within each of those consultants, you probably have 2.5 people working every single week. So that's approximately 60 people working every single week in delivering an exceptional scheme for Winchester. And I had a quick look at my invoice register, and I can tell you with some confidence that there are well over 100 suppliers that are supporting this project. Let's go to the first slide. So the scheme from a sort of a helicopter perspective, we're looking here with the Broadway to the south, Friarsgate to the north, and you can see the two parcels of the site. Overall, being delivered across 2 phases, there's 234 new homes. We have a series of different mixed age group children's play spaces being created, and weaving throughout all of the new buildings, accessible public realm. We are creating 3,631 square metres of commercial floor space, as well as a variety of new jobs and business opportunities. There's 6,600 square metres of new public spaces, and one of those is what we have named Wolf Staplers Square. And that's very much an invitation to the repurposing, and that we would love to see Wolf Staplers Hall coming forward in future. We have a new river connection, the deculverting of the culvert that runs through the bus station site. We're calling New Abbey Mill Lane, forming a new connection which will become an attractive pedestrian route through to the north of the site. We are retaining King's Walk and the Antiques Market, as well as Coitbury House. It will be a car-free development, save for blue badge parking as necessary for the accessible homes. 587 cycle spaces, as well as improved bus infrastructure, which I'll talk a little bit more about. We'll be providing 64 new trees, which is roughly 700% increase in tree provision on the site. There aren't that many trees there at the moment, as well as that reopened river culvert. I'll probably use this as an opportunity to just talk a little bit about climate resilience. All of this will be spelled out in some detail in the application when it comes in later in the year. But the energy strategy for the site at present is through air-to-air heat pumps. The benefit of an air-to-air heat pump is that, and it's very topical sitting in quite a warm room today, although I'm glad this meeting wasn't last week, because it would have been even more difficult. The benefit of an air-to-air system is that you do have temperature lopping as a minimum. It's effectively turning the heating system in reverse. And you can also add an additional bolt-on which provides further temperature control. The temperature lopping provides 3 or 4 degrees reduction, but with the additional module you can bring the temperature down by further. It's not full comfort cooling. We don't really believe in comfort cooling. We've designed the schemes so that the vast majority of these homes are dual aspect. We want to make sure that you do have the ability to control the temperature within your home without having to rely on cooling systems, because that's more energy being used. We also have some very ambitious energy usage targets, which the last report I saw, albeit it's not the final, does see us meeting those targets. Next slide, please. We move on to then the upper floor plan. It might just be worth jumping backwards and forwards between those two plans, if you wouldn't mind cycling backwards and forwards a couple of times, just so we can see. The blue area on the ground floor plan represents the commercial spaces, and you can see that as we move to upper floors, we are into residential spaces. The different tones of red and pink are relating to different sized homes. So there is a variety throughout. What we've really tried to do in our proposals here is design a varied mix, and we're particularly excited about our masonette typology, which we could have done some very, very large townhouses, which I've had reference to £1 million houses earlier on, which those would have been, but we don't think that's right. We think that pursuing a greater variety of homes, which allows us to achieve something that is little A, affordable, provides a more accessible entry point for people that want to live in the city centre. Yeah, I think that's probably all I want to say there. We're going to be bringing the scheme forward in 2 phases. The first phase there in amber is bounded by Middlebrook Street one side, Friarsgate to the north, Tanner Street and Silver Hill to the south. That is the area of the project that we'll be bringing forward a detailed application. The area indicated in blue will be coming forward in outline only. You can see the blue outline, which we always, well, we like to keep on this plan because it's there as a reminder of the boundary of the supplementary planning document. We don't make up the whole of the SPD area. We are only delivering a part of that. And, you know, in many ways that speaks to the quantum of development that we have access to, means that we can't do all of the things that the SPD had hoped to deliver. Albeit we are delivering a very large share of that. Next slide, please. Just a little bit to say about permeability through the site. Currently, the first phase is very much bounded by 4 roads with no permeability through it. You have Middlebrook Street, Friarsgate, Tower Street, and Silver Hill, and you can't get through that block in any way, shape, or form. So that we've introduced a series of sort of ginnels and alleyways and so on and so forth, which we think are really going to be very attractive when built. And one of the most important of those we'll see in some images shortly, which is giving access to all sides of the former antiques market, which is currently quite buried and hidden in the courtyard of King's Walk. Over on the second side of the site, we do have a deliveries only, emergency vehicle only route through the site, which will run along the deculverted river, very heavily controlled by bollards at either end and bookable delivery slots and so on and so forth. But the other routes there you can see weaving through the SPD area are all pedestrianised. Next slide, please. This is an image just to remind everybody that the second phase can only be delivered with the decanting of the bus station. And this is a very simplified diagram that reminds everyone what the proposed change is there. And I think the thing that I always like to call out on this diagram is that there isn't, even in the second phase, there isn't an additional bus that comes down Tanner Street in Silver Hill that doesn't already go down Tanner Street in Silver Hill. It's the same buses, the same route as happens currently. The change actually happens down at the bottom of the Broadway. But the benefit to this is that area where you can see the 2 purple diagrams, arrows, sorry, meeting the Broadway, is suddenly that area is completely released from any bus traffic, and we have the opportunity there to extend the footway to the northern edge of the Broadway and actually really generate an incredible public space. Next slide, please. So these are a minor update to some of the CGIs that would have been seen at the last public consultation event. There will be further artist impressions and CGIs coming forward with the planning application. Importantly, these are artist impressions. The planning application will include 2 types of image. They'll include verified views, which are taken from very, very specific points as agreed with the LPA, and governed by a very strict methodology as to how they are prepared. And we will also have within there additional views that we feel like it's important to include in order to properly articulate the character of the places we're creating. These images fall into that latter category. So this is an image looking east at King's Walk on the right hand side, and underneath what is known as building A1. It's a building designed by Henley Hale Brown. And you can see, albeit it does look like the lighting in this image is a little dark, you can get a glimpse there of the antiques market underneath the arches. Next slide, please. And this is the view from completely the opposite side. So now we're looking at King's Walk from Tanner Street, and we're looking through the Undercroft, which is currently used as a bin store and a loading bay. We're opening that up in order to create that permeability through to the rear side of the antiques market, which you can see on the next slide, please. On the left-hand side there, this is currently slightly marred by an extension to create a toilet block for that building, which we will remove and restore the other side of that building to its former glory. And again, yeah, there you can see that sort of hanging light in the distance, which will take you all the way back through to Middlebrook Street. And we can see we can envisage this place being a very vibrant, very active, and interesting counterpoint to what we believe is one of the finest places in Winchester, being the square. We've always imagined trying to create this sense of a dumbbell, if you like, which kind of connects down the high street. One loop effectively being at the square, and another loop weaving around that first phase in our scheme. And we think that by creating these kind of smaller, intricate spaces, we will achieve that with active frontage. So next slide, please. This then is as though you are stood or have just walked down from Friars Gate between building A1 on the right hand side, which is the building designed by Henry Howell Brown, and the building on the left, which is designed by East. This is looking south, and you can see the former antiques market at the end there. Next slide, please. And this is just one of the images that we've included, just the only image we've included here, which is for phase 2. And as a reminder, we are bringing that forward in as outline only, but we know how important it is to articulate what type of a place this will be when we do bring forward those reserved matters in future. And I think we then have a short animation, which I'm not sure people will have seen, which starts to give a bit of an impression of activity and a sense of the dimension, scale, character of the building. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for the introduction. We wanted to say anything more at this point, Councillor Todd, or no?
You were making a point. We wanted to crack on. And,
right, thank you. Right, so from my point of view, so this item concerns the updated business case for Central Winchester Regeneration and the proposed submission of a planning application. The purpose of scrutiny this evening is not to revisit the principle of regeneration, nor are we determining a planning application. Rather, our role is to consider the updated business case before Cabinet and to understand how the scheme has evolved since the original business case, what benefits it's now expected to deliver, and what risks or trade-offs Cabinet is being asked to accept. Members will be aware that there are a number of significant elements to the original proposition that are no longer expected to be delivered, including affordable housing, a hotel, a capital receipt, and replacement income opportunities. At the same time, officers maintain that the wider regeneration, economic and public realm benefits continue to provide a strong case for proceeding. Therefore, I think there are 3 possible scrutiny conclusions tonight. The first is that the change is significant, but the revised scheme still delivers sufficient public benefits to justify proceedings. So effectively a green light, we just say go. Changes are significant that Cabinet should be particularly mindful of certain risks or trade-offs. That's our kind of amber light. Or the changes are so fundamental that Cabinet should reconsider the underlying proposition. So that's our red. So our task this evening is not necessarily to reach a view on the scheme itself, but to help Cabinet understand any issues that the committee believes should be taken into account before it makes its decision. After all, it's not our decision. They're just providing stuff for Cabinet to make the decision. So let's see, Councillor Power's itching to go. So go ahead, Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. It's money. It's money for me. It's always money, isn't it? I notice there's going to be no there's going to be a loss of income. However, in the fullness of time, surely we will have some council tax income and some business rates income. So I'd like to know what the timescale is for seeing that and whether that is being modelled in the fullness of time. The compulsory purchase would be a high risk option. I'd like to better understand the costs and the time impact that would mean should we have to take that route. And I'm getting slightly concerned about the overall risk we have in Silver Hill, and I don't think it's being adequately represented in a way the public can understand. We have the purchase of the surgery with no meanwhile use. That's a loss of income. We've got a considerable loss of income documented in this report, which we need to understand. Is there a place where both the capital income and the income impact and benefit over the period of development is monitored and portrayed? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm happy to pick those up. If I may, I'll just start by reminding committee around the purpose of this report that is going to be in front of Cabinet. And it's not about Cabinet approving a business case. As you've already mentioned, Chair, this is about Cabinet having oversight of an update to the business case to let them know whether it still makes sense to pass through the next gateway. So the business case has already been presented to Cabinet, that was approved, and we entered the development agreement. So the stages that we're going through and the gateways that we have are set out in that development agreement. So there is a lot of detailed financial information in the updated business case, but it's the summary of that, all that work is presented in the covering report, and it's economically, does it still make sense for the Winchester area? Financially, is it still affordable to the council? And is there still a commercial and a management case? So picking up on the sort of the financially, is it affordable to the council? I haven't taken account of council tax and business rate income that will be generated by the scheme, because we're not at a point where we can actually forecast that at the moment, because we don't know whether it will be small businesses, large businesses, you know, how many businesses will be there. So it's a bit early in the process to do that. But I can reassure committee members that when it comes to things like the lost income, that is already factored into our medium-term financial strategy. So I have oversight of all of the financial implications that we have in this paper before us this evening, whether it's the loss of a capital receipt for the assets as they go into the scheme, or the lost income, and they are assumptions around those have already been factored into the medium-term financial strategy. So as it says in the report, it's deemed to be affordable within the context of everything that's happening within our council. So I hope that provides you with some comfort.
There's a sort of quick supplement to that. You know, the figures, for example, when you talk about the loss of income, assume, for example, that people who are no longer able to park in the Friarsgate car park leave Winchester never to return, rather than parking in Middlebrook Street or the Brooks. So it is an absolute worst case scenario. And similarly, the other things that are talked about, the business rates, the council tax, and in practice, with new people living in the city and new places of work, the income tax, you know, all the other financial benefits are captured more widely. And I think that, to me, is the lens that we start with, which is this right for the city rather than anything else? Because frankly, in 10 years, you know, in 20 years time, people look at, I don't know, the Brooks Centre, and they question about whether it's right for the city, although actually it was quite good for the council. And that's the balance that we need to look at. And in the end, that again is a decision that was effectively taken 10 years ago, which was, we have to get it right for the city.
Chair, if I may just round one thing off on the finances. Still, it's been talked about £4.5 million worth of still going into the scheme. Jigsaw will be paying still to the tune roughly £3.9 million to £4 million as a result of building out the scheme. So yes, we are aware of the money side of things.
So, Skees, I just wanted to obviously this the CWR is coming before us. It is the updated business case. It is one of the points where the cabinet is being asked to comment on it is, or to note, is the updated business case. Obviously, and that needs to be noted, and the planning permission is, this is giving authority for the planning permission to be submitted. Now, the two go hand in hand. So there have been changes to the business case, and that does need to be considered if the decision is made to move forward with the planning permission. I would ask you a question on that. What element of the original proposition would be removed before officers would conclude that the scheme no longer represented value for money?
It sets out in the report that the primary objective of Central Winchester regeneration is around regeneration and the benefits that that brings, not around it being an investment for financial return. So, so provided it is still affordable, then it's okay from a financial perspective. So that the business case does not predicate the council getting a return on this, a financial return. It's about wider regeneration benefits.
I will perhaps readdress the question to Councillor Todd. So from that answer, my interpretation is that the officers are happy that we spend as much money as is needed, millions and millions on this project, because it as long as it doesn't make the council go bust, we can spend as much as we want to spend. Is that your view as well?
Well, certainly it's not what we're doing. So whether it's my view or not, I don't think that's my view. The council has a duty to provide services and remain financially viable, but we have made choices. I mean, you know, there was a reference made earlier. Councillor Lee talked about density, height, public space, environmental standards. Those are things that we decided to restrict through the SPD. We made that choice. We made the choice that it was regeneration, and we've respected that choice since. That has actually been I mean, Green Party wasn't represented at the time, but that was a bipartisan approach to say we are regenerating. We are taking a rundown part of our city and we are making it better, and that is our primary objective. And we have looked through the lens and worked our finances to say that that is affordable. Does that mean we're not being careful with public money? No, of course it doesn't. But it is genuinely hard and genuinely expensive in today's world. And I don't know if Mr. Walford wants to provide perspective from 3110 to do regeneration at the moment. You know, if I look back at previous assumptions all the way through, I mean, I'm being slightly cheeky here, but I did reread the SPD viability, and it was making assumptions about housing grant from Homes England, which we're not getting. You know, it was making assumptions about other grants that we might be able to get. It didn't include financing costs. So we've been making choices all the way through to say the start point, the anchor point, is to look at this and say, is it right for the city? And then are we doing this in a way where the 5 parts of the case make sense? And that, I believe, we have in front of us. But it is, you know, there's a fantasy world where we'd be sitting here going, oh yes, you know, we're making tons of money and we're able to do all of these things. But that is not the world we're in, unfortunately. We've made choices about centering on regeneration, and we are in an extraordinarily difficult financial environment. And most people at this point are putting things on hold or giving up. And we're not. Partly because I don't think, you know, I think we need to be realistic about where the Winchester stands in the government's spending priorities, and waiting for the magic money machine tap to be turned on is not a sensible approach. And partly because I do genuinely think we have something, you know, we've made our choice on the development agreement about the approach we're going to take. This proposal reflects that. And we've made our choice on that. And I think it's the right thing to be doing.
I think I'm sure you don't mean, I'm sure I've misunderstood or something, but I think, as you said, I think there's cross-party agreement. The regeneration in this area is sensible, and it was already agreed that the site assembly costs would be part of the business case. That's accepted. But there's been changes since, and we understand, and the report lays out the reasons for those changes. But what I was trying to get an answer to is, at what point do those changes become so significant that we actually say this is not, this project's no longer viable? So not this point would be my point. I think that, and yeah, sorry, Ms. Keys stuck her hand up.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I just wanted to make the point that the other cases set out in the appendix attempt to quantify all the other benefits of Central Winchester regeneration, and Mr. Walford can help to summarise those, to set them out in front of committee this evening. But that's where we attempt to quantify all those benefits from the scheme. So I would hate to be misquoted that we would spend endless amounts of money, and provided we had that cash, it would be the right decision. It's about balancing those 5 cases.
You know, for example, there's a reference to the hotel. The hotel came out because it made the finances work. Within the constraints of the SPD, of the broad planning framework and the objectives that we set for this project, we have gone through all, you know, our development partner, our finance team, closely looked at by 3110, have gone through and sweated every single thing we can in order to try and improve the financial situation. We have not been casual about the finances. You know, we have made choices. We have looked at options to improve how it all works financially. Simple example, you know, in an earlier version of the outline images, you saw a very kind of rounded looking building by the waterside in Friarsgate, and it's not round anymore. And the reason it's not round anymore is we were sweating, well, if you make it round, it's hard to get the right proportion of usable space, the cost balance goes wrong. Every detail is being pushed, but within the constraint, within the objectives that we set ourselves. But I think
Councillor Lammy.
Mr. Walford might summarise the key point. Mr. Walker.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to come in on the financial point and the challenge of getting things delivered at this point in time. It is a fiendishly difficult and viability environment, and I think, you know, it might interest the committee to hear that, you know, not only are schemes coming forward elsewhere without affordable housing, but they're also coming forward without affordable housing, but with grant to make them happen. That, you know, that there are councils looking at paying developers to do the work that we're paying for here in order to try and make regeneration happen. It is a fiendishly difficult market at the moment, and perhaps Nick, if you wanted to give that kind of independent voice as well, so it doesn't sound so biased from me.
And just very quickly, Chair, if I may, before to come back to your original question, we set out 6 investment objectives on top of the SPD requirements back in 2021. Those covered work, live, play, student experience, overnight tourism, sustainable development. We're achieving most of them, apart from a hotel and affordable housing. So the question of what point do you stop, I'd suggest it's when maybe at least 50% or less might be being delivered, but we're far from that at the moment. It's just, though, that's an important point that we set back in 2021 when we embarked on this journey. Those were things we wanted delivered, and by and large, we are getting them delivered, and we're not closing the door to affordable housing yet. Conversations are still ongoing, and we'll continue with both Jigsaw and Homes England to try and find ways to deliver that.
So just building on what Matt just said there in regard to the market, if I address that point first before coming just on to the rounded business case and the process that involves. The markets are incredibly difficult. We're seeing that across all types of regeneration schemes across the UK. It's even in mainstream news. You might have seen yesterday, I think it was yesterday or the day before, even on the BBC main news, on the Bristol Island Temple scheme, where the very same kind of consequences of no affordable housing being delivered on that scheme either. So it's a very, very tough marketplace. The case, and we've discussed it this evening as well, has given those really big fundamental macroeconomic global events which are really leading to that. And in addition to that, obviously the consequences to the financial markets and the interest rates, and then also the changes in regulation and the planning environment as well. So more costs attributed to those types of angles as well. So it's been quite a period since, well, certainly since 3110's my involvement in the scheme since 2021, and that marketplace being incredibly difficult. I think when looking at the business case, firstly, it follows the best practice set out by the Treasury Green Book and the 5 cases. Now, the reason they put that into recommend that it's done in those 5 cases because you're balancing out those various items that you should be considering within making that decision around a scheme, and whether it's when you're trying to determine whether an option or a scheme represents a deliverable and value for money proposition for a council. Those are the key elements. So again, the strategic case really was revisiting, as Ken has just said, those objectives which have held fast, and seeing if those changes to the scheme, because of those wider influences, they're still being met. The economic case obviously brings in that cost benefit analysis element and that value for money appraisal. We can go into that in a bit more detail. But the commercial case, I think that's probably the bit which we haven't really discussed there, and a lot of work was done with the scheme's advisors, Brown Jacobson, from the legal point of view, in terms of how does this work, in terms of the risk and the management of that going forwards. How do we balance if there are changes, and have been changes in terms of the consortium, and how do we protect the council from that point of view, and how robust was that process? Well, actually looking back on it, it's been very robust. We have dealt with those changes, and we're still going forwards. The financial case explores everything that Ms. Keys has just said there in terms of the affordability to the council's position, and previously we have set that out in terms of the position we're in now, where it's like, what happens if the revenue is not reclaimed, or there is no land value. So that position, and that's being factored into the council's affordability. And then the management case again, so those processes of governance, the project management, the risk arrangements, those processes are all happening, and again are proving robust, and having the sight on what's evolving, why it's evolving, etc. Those regular intervals are set out. So the business case is quite a simple document in that regard. It breaks it down into those and then weighs those elements against each other to say, is it affordable, and is it demonstrating value for money? Now, the assessment at this point is yes to both those items in effect, and supporting that. The commercial case is demonstrating that you've got the processes and the structure to be able to allow for that change and flex as the world's requiring at the moment. So that's the overall. Happy to take any other question in regard to any of those elements, but I hope that kind of gives sets the scene in terms of that balanced approach, and ultimately that strategic case of hitting the objectives.
Thank you. Generally, I think this is quite a good scheme. We've done quite a good job on that. But regeneration is also about regenerating some of the businesses within the city as well. And I'm quite conscious that we need to attract more tourists in, because that's part of our business. So I'm interested in the viability of the hotel. Is it because you don't think there's a sufficient number of people wanting to use the hotel in occupancy levels, or is it the cost of build?
It's actually demand from operators, and there's a fairly forgive me if I go off on a tangent for a bit of a geeky point for a moment, but there's a consistency across all sort of income generating assets. I wouldn't talk about homes as assets, but I think in this case it's an asset. All income generating assets, with an office or student housing or a hotel, they all are directly linked to gilt rates, interest rates. And if you've got, if you build a hotel for £20 million and you're earning a yield on that at 7, 8, 9% or something like that, you might question the level of risk and effort that goes into that and say to yourself, well, I'd rather just leave it in the bank and make half as much money and take absolutely no risk. So where base rates are relatively high, I mean, they're not high in the longer term, but certainly in the last 10, 15 years, they're relatively high. It's slowing down appetite. It's slowing down appetite. High build costs means that the return for investment is lower. Base rates pretty high. The margin's too skinny for those sorts of things. We did consider whether purpose-built student accommodation would be appropriate for the site. Got 2 fantastic universities in the town. It's a very, very popular place for student accommodation, but the investment market isn't really there. And the same decision was taken with regards to the hotel. Councillor Mather.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just referring back to the previous item where the request was that we had a sort of revised business case prior to a planning application. Is this not actually exactly the same as that, in that we are having a revised business case prior to a planning application being put in for central Winchester regeneration? And at the end of the day, is it not that the overall project is then underneath the development agreement, and it will be that then dictates the sort of levels of sort of commercial and economic return? The business case is just a snapshot in time to make sure that we're still okay in terms of proceeding to the next stage. So is that the case, and is that sort of my understanding correct in terms of what we're actually sort of reviewing here this evening and what will go to cabinet subsequently?
Excuse me, I think that's exactly that. The chair asked the question about when would things get so bad that you would stop, and this is part of the assurance process that we are heading in the right direction. And so I think it's exactly that. And Nick's given you an indication. Emma, Mrs. Taylor presented to the member briefing the headlines of that business case as well, and it does show a positive economic benefit to the wider economy around the city and in the wider district. To give you a little bit more assurance when things that our finance colleagues do say no when things get really bad. On the affordable housing, we did explore whether or not the council, via the HRA, could actually afford to build some homes here. And there simply wasn't enough cross-subsidy from the development, from the private development, to allow that would make it economically viable and sustainable for the HRA. And so that was a no from the finance team on that respect. So it's not a case that we're just being gung-ho and we're off. There are limits to what we're able to do, and that was just one example. It's referred to in the paper for that very reason, because we have explored virtually all the options we could at that point on the affordable housing. So there are limitations to what we will do.
Yeah, because I just had, from the finance point of view, I'm reassured because we continually assess as we're going, but we have to come to a point where all the work's been done and it's time to put in a planning application. And at this particular point, we note where the business case is. You're quite right, James, and that's where it is at this point. It's still affordable. There's still a good case for it, and we have to move to the next stage. We could wait forever until we're absolutely, economic conditions are perfect, but that'll never happen. And this is the point that's reasonable to our partners who have put a huge amount of work into this stage that it would be really difficult and unreasonable for us to say, oh no, we're going to wait until it changes in this direction or this. It is reasonable at the moment, and that's a really important part of our partnership with Igloo and with Jigsaw. So, you know, I think you do need to take that into account as part of the process.
I noticed the so the caution that Lisa Gertman sort of gave for the original proposal for the last item, that at a 3-month delay, the officers couldn't then commit to the financial case being the case when it came back after that 3-month delay. And I think that's something that we should be thinking as a salutary lesson here, is that the further delay, you know, the reason we've had, you know, sort of significant changes to the business case is because of delays that have already been built into the system and the, you know, sort of assessment that's been made, subject to the global situation and the national situation changing. And the more we delay, there's no guarantee that those things won't get worse. So I think the idea to actually sort of proceed as quickly as possible is pertinent at this point. Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Chair, thank you, and thank you, Matt, for the presentation. And you can see my well-thumbed copy of the SPD, which I feel wedded to, and that came out of a very difficult time with the Silver Hill collapse. And this was a real coming together of the community about what they wanted. And I don't think we should make any apologies for putting in some things like, we don't want things to be higher than this, because it's put constraints in that people really wanted to see, and some elements that I think people found really valuable. So I appreciate that this has continued to be a building block in what has been a long journey. However, no matter how much I'm wedded to this and the scheme, I think we have to ask ourselves as Scrutiny that this is our land at the end of the day. We're putting in the local plan commitments on other developers to provide affordable housing as part of any housing schemes that are coming forward. And yet on our own project, we can't make that work. And I think I asked you last week, Matt, in the briefing, is there anything that you can share with us to help us understand why there's not a turning point here that would allow affordable housing to be here? Because to me, to have land that we own and not integrate affordable housing into the scheme is a real failure. The other element that's missing, of course, are some of those other things that we wanted. The hotel to bring economic growth. Lots of people wanted the bus station or some better bus facilities to provide positive elements. They're sort of missing. And so we've got a list of things that we're chipping away at, that we can't have this, we can't have that. Then on the other side, of course, you've told us about the financial elements, you know, the still money that's got to go in, although there will be money coming back. We've got the elements of the lost revenue that we've been talking about ever since the project started, on the buildings where we get a good rental income. No residual value in the land. So on the other side, we're losing some things, but the finances are all going west as well. And I accept what's being said, that here's an aspiration about regeneration, and there's some costs in some of the things that people wanted. Blue being part of it, the culverts being exposed, all those things cost money. But I just wonder how we as Scrutiny are not getting a clearer understanding of why something so fundamental like the affordable housing is not here. There's not even an off-site option that Mr. Tate mentioned earlier, and how we can justify that pivot point on this project, as the chairman rightly said, as to where's the tipping point? Where do we then say we've lost so much of what we aspired to? that we can't go ahead. And I'm not clear yet as to what that position is. So sorry, a long speech to ask the question really about some of those fundamental points that I think we were all promised and expected, but you're having to reroute because of the finances. Maybe you can help us. Thank you.
I think I'll ask the councillors to respond to that first.
Well, I think it really relates to the previous question. We've reached a point where we're saying this is what's in the scheme, and this is what it costs. And if we don't take the decision to move on from now, as in the previous answer, we may lose some more things, but at this stage we won't. We may gain some more because circumstances may allow us to have some grants for affordable housing. But if we wait, the question is weighing up, right, this is where we are. This is where we are and what's available. And the affordable housing element of it, you know that the position is that developers can argue a case for viability, and the planning authority has to accept that case about viability, and that's in the local plan. So yes, it's regrettable that the circumstances mean that we can't do it, but what's the alternative? The alternative is to say, we'll hang fire here, we'll wait, which would be unreasonable to our partners, as I've pointed out before. And we're moving into LGR. We know that SPDs have increasingly less value. We will not be in the position to take those decisions in the future. So if we think that this is a good scheme, now is the time to go forward. And I personally, having worked through this on the CWR board, see this as a crucial point where we agree to go forward with what we've got here and now. Because the alternative, we won't have the opportunity again, I don't think. And you know, we won't have the opportunity to use that building block of the SPD for a future project, because once Winchester City Council doesn't exist, it's not going to matter to a new administration.
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, it's taking this question, but coming at it from the other direction, because I mean, what's come across very strongly is that schemes like this are falling away elsewhere. And you've put this forward, there's lots of numbers. My background as an actuary means I love numbers, but actually, if we take what's happening here is that you come forward with and you're putting this to us as something that actually can be delivered, that you want to support. Obviously, Cabinet has been through their process as well. What is it about Winchester that makes us special? Why are we? What do we bring? Is it the transport links? Is it the tourist kick that we have relative to others? I mean, we have at the moment the very low vacancy rate was 2.7%, I think, at the moment in terms of the retail property. There's a lot of really, really strong things happening in Winchester. How much of that, I'm now in danger of, well, I'm going to quote Field of Dreams, where, if you build it, they will come. How much is that what's behind the fact that confidence is remaining here where it's not remaining elsewhere?
I think it's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, I suppose every project has its own reasons for either stalling or moving forward. And I'm pleased to say that the majority, in fact, I think all Igloo projects are proceeding for various reasons. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, that in places it is as a product of a viability challenge where there are affordable housing is undeliverable, and that leads to it being supported by grant, whether that for infrastructure or otherwise. But yeah, I don't want to miss the opportunity to kind of to echo and amplify the points of, you know, why Winchester is so great. You know, it is such a completely unique opportunity that these don't come around very often, sites like this, and it's incredibly special. We're very drawn to it for that reason. In many ways, Winchester's not a typical location for us. We're typically in sort of post-industrial towns, quite often up in the northeast, and you know, so in many ways it doesn't make sense for us to be doing this project. But the flip side of it is it's complicated. It's difficult. It's got lots of constraints. There's a serious push for environmental quality. There's a real need to delve into engagement and build stakeholder relationships. You know, that all of those elements really drew us to this project in the beginning, and that remains the case. I think I might have answered the question now.
A large part of this report is exempt. Were the questions that the committee wanted to ask on the exempt portion of the report? So we've done a good job of asking the questions without referring to the exempt material, which is appreciated. If we can keep as much in the public as possible, then that's good. Okay. Well, I think we can. I did have a. I'll throw in one last question. Looking at the updated business case as a whole, what officers consider to be the single greatest risk to the successful, or perhaps it's the whole team? What are the teams considered to be the greatest risks to successful delivery of the scheme?
Gosh, you like put me on the spot, Chair. I don't know if my cabinet members may want to answer that as well. I don't think there's one, I'm afraid to say, and maybe expect me to say that. I think buses remain a risk, and there is a different plan in the paper, a more detailed plan than the one you saw on the screen. It's still work in progress. When Matt joined, when I joined, we had that as the single biggest risk, because we have an obligation to give vacant possession to Jigsaw off the bus station. So we must find an alternative way of providing bus stops and stands and layover stands for the bus companies. Those conversations have continued for the last 2 years. I'm, I think, cautiously optimistic. The county and the bus companies are there. There's a bit more work to do. We've got engineering drawings. What we really need to do is have some plans and images to get the hearts and minds, and some consultation on that and get that out there. I think the wider economy remains a risk. You know, there is in the business case, there is a kind of heat map. If costs go up and values come down, where does that leave us? That makes life very, very difficult, not just for us, but for everybody. And at that point, you would hope government would step in with some grant like they did after the financial crisis in 2008-9. I'd say they're the two biggest.
So the single biggest risk of the scheme is not going forward with it now, because any further delay would hugely risk the deliverability of it. And yes, there are specific elements, as Ken has come through, that are risks to it, but actually failing to take a decision and failing to be decisive is probably as big a risk to this scheme as anything else, from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to frame it slightly differently, but I mean, I think LGR is a risk just because the environment changes so dramatically once we move into that world, and it becomes more difficult. And that's one of the reasons for being timely. And I suppose the other thing is, you know, belief in a miracle is a risk, because actually there are no easy answers on this. And if there were, genuinely, you know, there's not an easy answer just waiting to be picked. that we haven't looked at or tried to investigate. And I did actually appreciate when we started talking about, well, what about a hotel? What about student accommodation? A lot of those kind of conversations have gone on. And the what about, here's a concrete change, does it actually help? Is, you know, we've asked a lot of those questions. And if people have further thoughts outside the meeting, you know, or want to bring those to Cabinet, feel free to do so. But those are actually the questions that need to be asked, because there is no what if something miraculous happens. It's like, okay, what happens if we get rid of Woolstaples Square? What happens? Those are the kind of, what happens if we cover up the waterways? We discussed that, you know, and it's difficult because on the one hand you save a ton of money opening up the waterways. On the other hand, you affect the values because it's a less attractive area than it was before. So a lot of these questions have been looked at. So, you know, genuinely, I think everybody has tried their absolute hardest to find the best way forward within the constraints and objectives that we've set. And so I think not making a decision is probably the biggest risk at this point.
Thank you. We've got a couple of last questions. Councillor Bather and then Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, actually, it was just whether there's a bit more information about the bus stop on Tanner Street and the sort of requirement therefore to take the car parking space from Marks and Spencer's, just to, you know, sort of explain what the current sort of thinking is around that, please.
It's quite simple. Big buses, very tight turn from Tanner Street and Silverhill. We also need to provide 2 spaces. That was done 5-6 years ago by Arup, identified another couple of stands in there. To put that in would block all the traffic coming through Tanner Street, Silverhill, without taking a swerve into that car park, which allows buses to continue, traffic to continue past that stop, but also makes the turn easier for buses that are not stopping there. As simple as that.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, could I just ask, we've discussed the use of CPOs historically on this whole project and avoided it on many occasions when various elements have come up. You've put that option back in now, potentially on the car park acquisition. I'd be grateful to understand why you think that is less risky now and the reason why that is being put forward as a methodology. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps if I could answer that. We have good relationship with M&S. The valuation of the car park has been a joint instruction with us and them, and we are hopeful that we can achieve a satisfactory conclusion to agree the price for them surrendering the lease there. However, as Ken has just said, that land is required for the bus solution, and therefore we need to have the CPO just a backstop. And our hope would be that we don't have to use it, but we need to make it clear that we would be prepared to use it because it will be an obligation on the scheme to have that land to make it the bus solution viable.
Thank you.
Okay, so that can we move into debate then, please? Oh, sorry, Councillor. Councillor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just want to touch again on the affordable housing scheme. If by any chance in the future finances improve, is there any chance we could see some affordable housing on the scheme or not?
Yes, I think so. We'll be bringing forward an application that doesn't include affordable housing. There is a quirk with Homes England Affordable Housing Grant that if it is not Section 106 affordable housing, then you are eligible for grant. That is something that we will consider with our funding partners at the right time when we get to that delivery stage. But as Neil's been saying, Councillor Cutler's been saying, I think there is a decision point and we have to move forward. And at the moment, from where we sit, we cannot include it at this point. With a planning consent in hand, where it isn't Section 106 affordable housing, then we would be eligible to attract that affordable housing grant. So we may reconsider it at that point.
Mr. Hendy, I think, wanted to add something.
Just to reiterate that, and it's an irony that if there was an affordable housing obligation that prevents us bidding for Homes England grants to help finance the acquisition of any units for affordable housing, but if the local planning authority is satisfied by a viability assessment that the scheme is not capable of providing any subsidy towards the provision of affordable housing, then we could look to secure Homes England grant that would help us acquire some of the units, because here our partners committed to work with us to do that.
So let's move into debate. I've got Councillor Power up first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree we have to get on with this and go forward. It's no surprise to me that the affordable housing is no longer looking viable. If you look at building index costs since 2020, it's quite evident that we're looking at dramatic changes. And then you add the complexity of a very city centre site. I'd liken it to trying to replaster an airing cupboard. There's nowhere to stand while you do it. And I think that we have to move this forward. And we need more pound notes on the streets of Winchester if we're going to enhance the city and make it what it deserves to be. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
There is a tide in the affairs of man, which taken on the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, the life is bound in shallows. And I think we've been bound in the shallows for a jolly long time, bumping along, stuck in the mud. And I think this is a very good opportunity. Yes, there are lots of problems. There's going to be more problems, but there seems to be very careful thought gone into it by Jigsaw and by the officers. And I think I would fully support this and give it, go with it.
Thank you, Councillor Lamy.
Thank you. I think we've come to a point where if we don't go ahead with it, we're going to end up with 10, 15 years without anything in the centre of town. It will be controlled by people that don't live in Winchester or have anything to do with Winchester. But it's a straightforward business plan. That's what it's all down to. And I have the assurance that this is a better plan than the previous one that was 10 years ago when we turned it down. I think it makes economic sense because we need to bring in business and people into the city centre. So I'm very much in favour.
Councillor Atchwell.
Thank you, Chair. Like some of the people around the table, I've been a councillor here for a long time. Remember those debates we had regarding the PASS scheme, and I think it's time we just need to get on with this. I'm reassured by what the officers have said. Thank you.
Councillor Clear.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I also feel this is the right move for a city. I think it's a rare opportunity to repair, if I may say, an underused area and create a welcoming, sustainable quarter that serves residents, businesses and visitors for generations to come. So I'm just saying members should suggest or support rather the direction of travel and help shape a scheme that future generations will recognise as a good and necessary move for Winchester. So yes, thank you.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. And what a dilemma we're in, really, regarding the redevelopment of this site. The project that's on the table offers some of what we wanted, but clearly much is missing. And the financials are deteriorating at every look that we take on of this project. And the concern that I have is that we're being driven by LGR and what the unitary might say about a scheme in Winchester. I've heard colleagues this evening think that maybe we wouldn't get a fair hearing, and that therefore we're moving forward on something that is less than the optimum. And that I know will be a significant disappointment. I'm sure the Cabinet will make whatever decision they so choose next week, but I would ask them to continue to actually probe this absolutely 100% on all of the elements that are changing the scheme, and that we are therefore letting some of our residents down on what they are hoping for here. We have some, but not everything. And some of the constraints that we have to work under, particularly the financial and economic situation we find ourselves in, are obviously limiting. So I don't doubt the desire, but I think we have to at least recognise that this is not necessarily the aspiration that we had originally. And as I said, I would ask the Cabinet to continue to challenge on all of those elements and how you can actually improve on any of them, given particular opportunities that you might have. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Batho.
Thank you, Chair. I think for the large majority of the residents of not only the city but the district, look at the central winter regeneration and the long delays that they perceive that have taken us to get to this point, mean that the majority of them would be very, very pleased, I think, with actually progress and the signs that progress that we could make by sort of moving forward with this project. I think the fact that it will redevelop the area, the bus station particularly, is an area that is not particularly welcoming within the city at the moment. To have that redeveloped and turned into a open and an inviting space, along with obviously the housing and the ambience that the public domain, the public realm proposals in this project, sort of will bring to the city, I think will lift that whole area and will then have a beneficial effect to all of the sort of city and the surrounding area. So I certainly will be supportive and will support the recommendations. And I think we just need to get on with this project so that our residents can actually see a council that's actually moving forward rather than constantly looking backwards and wondering what could we add to this to make it any better. We have the sort of final solution here. We just need to get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, just a comment, a more genuine comment particularly, I think it just reminded me through this process of the importance of public scrutiny. And I think I've really appreciated, and hopefully the public will appreciate, that we've actually stepped through so much today. We've stepped through what's, the history of how we've got here, the cross-party working that was done following the collapse of the previous arrangement. What was the aspiration? What steps you're taking, the changes in circumstances, and sort of element by element, what has been included and not included and why. I think it's particularly good. We couldn't do it on the previous discussion, but actually we had the numbers available to us, but all of the debate we've managed to keep in the public domain as well. I'm coming to a similar conclusion. It's unfortunate where we are that we're losing elements that we would really like to have had, but it retains the core element of regeneration that we have here. And so I'm hope that Cabinet will be able to take everything said here into account, but actually I would support it proceeding on the basis of where we've landed and where we are.
Thank you to the committee for their input. I would like to say thank you to all the representatives who turned up today. It has been some questions, and I've really appreciated some of the clarity and answers that we've had. Personally, I am uncomfortable about the fact we don't seem to be able to say what would cause us to actually say we need to rethink about this project. That makes me uncomfortable, but in overall, I was thank you for your answers. They were very helpful to the committee. So in terms of recommendations, I think there is different views across the committee, but I think overall we're saying that there have been a number of significant changes to the business case, which we all acknowledge, and including the affordable housing provision, the hotel accommodation, capital street and replacement income, that are not currently expected to be delivered anymore. I think we need the, I think it would be reasonable to say that the committee requests that Cabinet explicitly considers and records whether the regeneration benefits of the revised scheme continue to justify the level of public investment. I think we've had that review today, but I think that's, I do want to pass on some recommendations to the Cabinet. So I think if everyone has agreed with that, okay. And we all, I think there needs to be one about finances as well. We've talked about the finances. We need to ensure that the financial implications of the project, including the loss of existing income streams, the additional contribution in the absence of the capital receipt, are captured in the updated financials. So I think, again, I think we've been pretty reassured by Liz, but I think it does no harm to include that as a recommendation as well, if people are in agreement. Anything else? We want one in there about opportunities, looking for opportunities to committee requests that Cabinet continues to look for opportunities to improve the business case, including reintroduction of affordable housing. Is that? Yeah. Okay. So we'll include that. Okay. And I think that's it. So thank you everybody for coming and for presenting, and we've just got a couple of short items just to finish off the meeting. So we've just got a couple of short items to finish off today. But that's it on number 7. So if you can just wait there for a couple of moments. So item 8 is to note the committee's current work programme. I had some comments on this that I wanted to raise. Let me just pull it up. Right, so obviously in September we've got the River Park Leisure Centre that's coming forward, housing revenue account, other things. Right, on the Q1 finance and performance monitoring, as I've sent an email around about that we're going to try and focus on one element of the finance and performance monitoring. So we've asked for Greener Faster to come forward for the Q1 meet for September. In particular, not so much I had a meeting yesterday with the officers, and it's not so much on Greener Faster actually covers recycling and waste, but we've had a lot of presentations on that, so I figured we probably didn't need the officers for that. And also on the nutrient mitigation, there's been a separate working group on that in HEP, so I figured we would be duplicating it if we were covering it in scrutiny. So I think we're really going to focus on the other bits of Greener Faster, if that's okay. The other points I wanted to note were on Abbey House and the Guildhall. I know this has been raised as an item that we thought should be coming to a scrutiny committee. We've got a provisional plan. It's to be agreed, to be confirmed, for that to go to the Economy and Housing Scrutiny Committee in September. So it will go through a scrutiny committee. So I just wanted, might not be this one, but it will be coming out. On planning enforcement, follow up on planning enforcement, there's been a little bit of confusion over this about where that sits. So I hope I'll sending out a separate follow up on that shortly, hopefully to the committee. And I know one request was that we had added local plan to the forward agenda, the new local plan, the emerging one. That is quite prescriptive. There is not much for scrutiny to actually scrutinise because we're told very much how it's happening. So it seems that might be better as an all-member briefing. But I'm sorry, again, we're talking about engaged with officers about how that can happen so that we all get up to speed on that. Obviously, it'll still come to scrutiny at the right time, but in the interim, it might make sense for us to have an all-member briefing. So I'm following up with officers on that. They were the points I wanted to make. Anybody else have anything they wanted to raise? Councillor Laming.
Yes, I'd like to have a working group that looks at the leisure centre and compares how it's performing now to how it was predicted to perform in the business plan that we adopted when we decided to build it, and look at the general way that things are progressing in the leisure industry.
Is that associated with this? Okay.
Yeah, yes, I wanted to add something to this. I'd like to extend it to the accessibility of the leisure centre. Okay. I did an impersonation of a person today that was going to be in Winchester all day with a few hours to spare. So I thought, I wonder what I could do at the leisure centre in terms of swimming or a class. You can't. All they do on the website is steer you towards organised programmes. No casual access. So I pressed the button saying, tell me what I can do today. Nothing came back. Just sign up for classes. That is not accessibility to the general public. And it's no way to run a sweet shop, quite frankly. So I think we need to extend that to include access to the leisure centre.
I think we'll need to take this offline and discuss with officers who we don't have here today. I think that point might be better picked up. There is a committee that a couple of councillors sit on with the ladies. So it might be more appropriate for it to go there. Councillor Todd, did you want to comment?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm aware that there's a lot of discussion about the leisure centre at the moment, and certainly I've had a prior discussion with officers to say what sort of things could be talked about, and I think the two things that are talked about, which is how do things stand versus the original business case and everything that was put forward. There are aspects of, for example, the details of the contract that can't be discussed in public, and then how is performance at the leisure centre versus expectations. I think those are both very okay. Okay. So I think there's openness, and obviously questions like accessibility would fit within that scope. But so I think from the administration point of view, we would welcome the idea of this piece of work. Okay, I'll get with the officers and see what we can do on that then. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, no. Super. Right, that's item 8. Item 9, to note the latest forward plan of key decisions. Is that noted? Noted. Super. Thank you all for your patience. It's been a long evening, and thank you all for your contributions.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.